So have you gotten into anything else now?
Oh yeah. Started up some other ones.
I'm sorry.
Started up some other ones.
Okay.
We're in the oil business. We're a blender and a packager and a reseller.
What's up, man? You doing good?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our strategic priorities discussion this morning. I'm convinced that we're going to have we had a great meeting last time, and I think it's even going to be better today. So I'm glad all of you are here for this. Before we start, I would like to say that we're very pleased to have, I think, 6 members of the legislature with us today. Representative Fraley, who is certainly no stranger to us and who is with us at about every meeting. John, where are you? Thank you for being here. And also Senator Chad Barefoot. Senator Barefoot here? Okay, he's on his way. And I can understand why he's on his way, because I understand that in the last month he's both welcomed a new baby and started a new job. So we'll give him a few minutes to get here. Also in attendance today are Representative Ted Davis of New Hanover County. Ted? Thank you for being here. Representative Ed Haynes of Forsyth County. Representative Robert Reeves of Chatham and Lee counties. Okay, great. And Stephen Ross, Representative Ross of Alamance County. Thank you. These gentlemen will be attending our committee meetings this afternoon and joining us to discuss our strategic plan. So we're very appreciative that they are here. At this point, I'm going to introduce President Spellings to provide some opening remarks and introduce our.
Yeah. Did we put Lampy in charge of this?
Oh, thank you. You can just do that. That's all right. Thank you, Andrea. I can tell you Andrea's in full charge of this meeting now. President Spellings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome all. Great to see everybody here. Hope you all are having a good and relaxing summer. As many of you know, over the next 2 days, we will launch officially our strategic planning process focused around the 5 themes of accessibility, affordability, student success, economic impact, and excellent and diverse institutions. Later this afternoon, in your respective committees, you'll discuss one of those areas in greater depth, how to define the assigned theme, and what goals might be developed to advance or address it within the UNC system. I'm looking forward to attending some of those meetings and listening to the discussions. This morning, we have the opportunity to engage more thoroughly around 2 of those 5 areas, economic impact and excellent and diverse institutions. We'll explore how we can get the most from each of our institutions. One of our greatest strengths as a university, as you know, is the distinctiveness of our 17 institutions. And if we want each of them to continue to thrive, we must recognize the important differences among them as we shape the expectations we ask them to meet. We'll also discuss how we can increase the economic impact of this university has on the state and citizens that support us, considering how we can encourage innovation, initiate partnerships within our communities, and commercialize the world-class research being done by faculty and staff. This morning, we have asked 4 national thought leaders to talk about these 2 important themes. First, we'll hear from a leader who championed the public universities in his state and emphasized the role they each play in increasing college completion rates. That person is the former governor of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen. Governor Bredesen served 2 terms from 2003 to 2011. He was widely known and hailed for his advancements in education, including establishing a statewide pre-K program improving teacher salaries, and establishing the use of objective student performance data for teacher evaluation. Prior to his time as governor, he was two-term mayor of Nashville and founder of Health America Corporation. I've had the opportunity to get to know Phil through our work together on the Bill and Melinda Gates Advisory Panel and some efforts around the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's work, and he is a leading thinker and doer about the challenges that we face. Following Governor Bredesen's remarks, we'll open the floor for questions. After that, our own Dr. Junius Gonzalez will moderate a panel discussion with three other experts on the role of higher education in the economy. They are Dr. Jim Waddell, Vice President for Economic Development and Community Engagement at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. He'll share the framework that APLU has developed for thinking about economic impact. APLU believes that all useful things, that we can do useful things if we focus on developing people, developing innovations, and forming partnerships with communities. Also, Fran O'Sullivan, IBM's General Manager for Global Business Services, Global Operations, and Senior State Executive for North Carolina, will share her thoughts on what businesses are looking for from our students and some thoughts on how we might increase our ability to commercialize research. And last, Karen Levert, founder and president of Southeast Tech Ventures and chief operating officer of Ag Tech Ventures, Inc., an entrepreneur with over 25 years of business experience who's been working with universities for more than a decade to help translate the things they discover into research, through research into market-ready innovations. Again, following this discussion, we'll open the floor for questions. I look forward, as I'm sure all of you do, to hearing from our guests, and I'm grateful to them for their willingness to speak with us and answer our questions as we seek to excel in these areas. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Governor Phil Bredesen. Phil.
I speak rather softly, excuse me, softly sometimes, so I'm going to come up here where there is a microphone and say thank you. First of all, President Spellings, thank you very much for the invitation to come over here. I appreciate it very much. I'm sure each of you know that the system you have here in North Carolina is one that is widely admired across the United States. It's a very well-respected system. It certainly is in Tennessee. As a former mayor of Nashville, I can tell you that there's been a lot of effort and discussion over the years about how do we in Nashville replicate through Vanderbilt and our healthcare industry the kind of thing you have in the Research Triangle over here, and the kind of very, very warm and mutually supportive relationship between the university community and the business community is something which is admired across the United States. I was also have been involved with a project of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences called the Lincoln Project, looking particularly at public research universities. And we actually held a meeting over here and had some people, and I think, Anna, I think you were at that meeting if I'm not mistaken, and Carol Folk was here, and Prism was down here. Oh, there you are, down in the short. And also Randy Woodson responded to our request for information with a really long, thoughtful letter, which was passed out to all of the members. So this group has been very engaged with that effort as well. David Price, who's a member of Congress, of course, was at that meeting as well from here. When Margaret called me on the phone about this, she said you were beginning a formal strategic planning process, and this was kind of the official kickoff meeting for the current process, and asked me to speak to those issues. I'm not going to talk about the general process of strategic planning. The world is full of consultants that do that. I'm sure the university has got people all over the place who know a lot about that and can help guide and lead these discussions. But really to talk about just some of my specific experience that I've had, and things that from that experience I would hope that you might consider considering and talking about during that strategic planning process as well. I believe deeply in the importance of higher education. I think that becomes clear, but I'm also a governor who had to justify higher education to a lot of people who didn't share the automatic commitment to it of the people who were in this room. I'm somebody who had to cut funding a couple of times for higher education and bear the brunt of the the thoughts of the various chancellors and presidents for that, and so on. And what I want to come here today to do was really do two things. First of all, talk about three things that I hope you would consider in the strategic planning process. And then second of all, toward the end of my term as governor, we made some substantial changes in the higher education model in Tennessee. I don't know how applicable those are here. Everyone is different and everyone has different circumstances. But we'd like to just lay them on the table, perhaps as food for thought or something that might stimulate your own thoughts about some of the things that might be considered. During the time that I was governor, and really subsequently, in the two commissions I've served on, this one with the American Academy and then one with the Associated Governing Boards on the governance issue, one of the things that became clear to me is that more so than in most areas that I've dealt with, there is a real gap between the way the Academy sees itself and the way the outside public, I think, often looks at it and views it. I would sit in these meetings, and the approaches and thoughts of the faculty members and the administrative staff members were often very much at odds with the perception you have if you go out into the community and talk about things. And I think the heart of that is that the Academy, and I'm using that as shorthand for the faculty and the administrators, and in a sense, people around this table in this room who are here because of a strong belief in the value of higher education. I think the Academy takes it as an axiom that what it does is valuable. It has economic impact. It affects the income of students, and the public, on the other hand, I think often doesn't see this as quite so axiomatic. They look in higher education in terms of what will it do about things that I care about for myself, for my kids, for my grandchildren. When it comes to spending money, spending resources on things, I have lots of places to put it. My government has lots of places to put it. What is it that higher education offers in contrast with some of those other kinds of things that is meaningful for me? I think the two words that describe that I want to leave you with is intrinsic and instrumental. The Academy sees value as intrinsic. You have to be sort of a Neanderthal to think that it's anything other than a wonderful thing to have and invest in. And I guess I'm going to have to explain to you why it is we're so great, because you just don't understand. The public sees it as instrumental. What does it do to advance things that I care about? Is it a useful tool in my building a better life for myself and for my children? About 3 years ago, I chaired the governance commission of the AGB. You belong to it. This is sort of the industry group for trustees and members of boards of governors. And the group that I chaired had a lot of higher education professionals in it. There were college presidents, there were faculty members, there were experts from the subject areas of leadership out of the business schools, for example, and those kinds of things. One of the things that I did, and I guess it was in the second meeting, was to bring in a researcher from Peter Hart and Associates, who are one of the big national polling firms, just to talk to them about what information they had drawn from the various pollings that they had done related to higher education, and make a presentation on it. And it was interesting to me because the people around the table were astonished at the public's views of higher education. And in particular, the public is completely consumed with this notion of the cost of higher education and the debt that goes along with sending children to college, something that was kind of brushed off from within the Academy. It's just, it just costs a lot of money to do the kinds of things that we do. And I think one of the most helpful things in this governance process was to have people to really start to understand the extent to which the public is increasingly demanding justification for the kinds of investments that you all and me were seeking to make in higher education. And of course, every time a student graduates from college with a load of debt and no job, it just sort of underlines that particular problem more. So I noticed when you began talking about the subject of economic impact, which was on the agenda for this morning, I mean, that really is a part of the whole process of justifying yourself to the larger public, and the larger public being the legislature, the public at large, and all the other constituencies out there. I went back and read before I came over here that 2015 report that you all did demonstrating the collective economic value of the UNC system, and I thought it was valuable, but really wanted to caution you that I think it really is only a modest first step in terms of this process of justifying. And I'm hoping that as part of your strategic planning process, you can look at how you show that value in a much more direct and far less abstract way than a bunch of charts and figures and billions of dollars and those kinds of things. I think the change or the attitude that people have to adopt in this is to stop thinking in terms of saying, you know, here's what we want, here's what we need, and rather think in terms of, okay, what does the state need from us? What do the individual citizens in the state need from us? And how in our strategic planning process can we organize ourselves to meet those needs? It's really kind of marketing salesmanship 101, which is stop talking about what you want and start trying to understand what the customer really is looking for. And to do that, I think you've got to find ways to present the value of higher education and, you know, in very concrete and ways that are meaningful to people's lives. When I was in college, my college degree is in physics, and I had a physics professor. His name was Don Edwards, and he told me one time, if somebody says to you, asks you a question about something in physics, and you say to them, oh, that's very complicated, but until you've taken your course in, I don't know, partial differential equations or something, I really can't, I really can't say, it's hard for me to explain that to you. And he said, no, if you have to say that, that's a measure that you don't really have the full comprehension of your subject, that if you really have command of your subject, you can say something intelligible about it and meaningful about it to anybody at any level of sophistication who's an interested listener. And I think that may be true in physics. I think it's true in the world as large, and in terms of politics or the larger world, I call it the Walmart test. And what I used to do as governor is if I had some policy that I wanted to advance, I would forget about what the press said and forget about what this and certainly forget about what the various advocacy groups say, and imagine myself stopping somebody in the aisle of a Walmart and explaining to them what it was I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And if I could do so successfully in the aisle of a Walmart, I probably had a reasonable approach. If I had to wave my arms and, talk about white papers and billions of dollars and those kinds of things, I probably didn't have a very useful approach. And I have to say that approach had served me very well over the years of trying to bring these things home outside of the sort of immediate circle that these decisions take place in, and try to find ways to talk to people about it in their terms. And I don't mean talking down to them. I mean just understanding that somebody in the aisle of the Walmart doesn't think about higher education every day, doesn't automatically think it's the best thing in the world, wonders why the state sends money on that instead of fixing the road in their neighborhood and other things that are meaningful to them. And I think it's really important that we figure out how to do that. So when I said I'd talk about thoughts about that, the first thought is I hope that as you go through this, you would consider taking this idea of things like economic impact and expanding it to really a clear, down-to-earth, personally relevant explanation to ordinary citizens of why higher education, why the UNC system is worth supporting. And as I said, it's marketing 101. I mean, think about what it is the customer wants. What does North Carolina need from us? What do its citizens need and want from us? And then what do we have to do to meet those needs as the foundation of the strategic planning process? The second item that I wanted to mention with regard to the strategic planning process is that one thing that became very clear to me as governor, and even more so in the stuff that I'd done after I left office there, is that the reality is the business model for higher education is changing. It's just, it's different, and particularly and talking public higher education here, state support is declining everywhere in 50 states across the country. That is the tendency that I found on a lot of trustees is to sort of say, well, we just need to lobby the legislature a little harder and tell them to step up and do what's right. Or the hope for improved economic conditions. Maybe the economy will be better next year and we'll get some more money or something like that. But the reality is that what's happening now is not that 50 governors and 50 state legislatures have suddenly decided that they don't like higher education as much as they used to, but rather that there have been some fundamental structural changes in state finances, which are what are really driving these changes. Sometimes I'm in a conservative state like you are, and sometimes people sort of blame it on the conservatives, but the same thing is happening in New York, the same thing is happening in California, the same thing is happening in Massachusetts. It's not an ideological thing, it's a change in the structural nature of state government. And what's happening is that states are becoming more and more the administrative arm of the federal government, and what that means is that more and more of the finances of the state are moving beyond the direct control of the legislature. It's happening in a lot of places. It's happened with things like No Child Left Behind. It's happened with infrastructure, where the federal government's investment in infrastructure is declining precipitously compared to what has been in the past, and states are having to step up. You do need to repair bridges, and you do need to fix roads and build roads. Obviously, the 2008 recession has been hard on pensions, even in states that have done a good job of funding their pension plans. It's been hard on those, and that's produced pressure. But the big one, I point out, and this is a fine program. I'm not criticizing the program. The big one is Medicaid. Medicaid is absolutely the elephant in the room when it comes to state funding, and frankly, within the academy itself, you get very mixed views, because on one hand, it's affecting the funding of everything else. On the other hand, as you probably know, Chancellor, every medical school in the country is busy lobbying for more Medicaid money in their institutions. So you get very, very different things. You know, North Carolina is in a kind of interesting position, and I think it's got good and bad aspects to it. Obviously, the appropriations per FTE have been going down. The chart that I saw said about 20% over the last since the recession, which is more than the average across the country. Tuition increases have been among the higher in the country. Those are the bad news. The good news is you're still among the highest state-supported institutions in the country. I believe it was the 4th in the country when I looked at in the list, and the tuitions are still amongst the lowest in the country. So the danger in that is that it'd be easy to be complacent in the face of these changes in the business model. But the opportunity really is that I think this system has much more than the usual amount of opportunity to make these changes in a thoughtful manner, to have a kind of soft landing in this new world, rather than having to sort of face these emergency situations like California has been doing for the last couple of years, for example. And if as a part of the strategic planning process, you can begin to step up to that issue, I think the foresight of people in the past, the legislature and the governors in the past, and the way this has been funded, really gives you some elbow room and some opportunities and some flexibility that most states don't have to deal with these issues. I mentioned Medicaid, and I believe in back of the envelope calculations. I think they help you just sort of see the big picture on things sometimes. And I went and looked up across the 50 states how state budgets have changed, and the base year I used was 1987. How state budgets have changed since 1987 in terms of the proportion of money they put into different things. And for example, if somebody was spending 10%, a state was spending 10% of their revenues, and then 20 years later was spending 8%, that would be a 20% decline in the proportion. And when you put these things in the big buckets, and obviously there's issues with these because states accounts for things differently. Public assistance has gone down 67%. That's largely the 1990s welfare reforms driving that. Transportation is down 30%. Higher ed is down 16%. Elementary and secondary, K through 12 or pre-K through 12, is down 11%. Other is down 7%. Corrections are up 3%, and Medicaid is up 232%. Okay, all of the changes in other parts of the state budget are completely explainable by what has happened with Medicaid. And until this country and until individual states begin to deal in some substantive way about this, it's going to continue to be a problem. And of course, the reason states are affected is that at the federal government, they've got problems, but they just borrow. 49 of the 50 states do not have the legal ability to borrow for operating expenses, and in 35 of them, it's a constitutional prohibition. And so we're all faced with if Medicaid goes up by $1, and the tax revenues stay the same, we got to find $1 somewhere else to take out of that. And what's happening is it's affecting every other part of state government. And higher education is a particularly vulnerable place because it's kind of a balance wheel. You can always raise tuition a little bit and get some of that money back. And it's very tempting, I can tell you, for governors and legislatures to look at higher education for cuts because they do have other alternative sources for funds, unlike, say, children's services or some of these other kinds of institutions. Bottom line here, is that any enterprise has got to have a business model that works. It's got to provide a product that people want at a price that they're willing to pay. That's obviously true for private companies like a General Motors or an Apple. It's also true for higher education. And obviously we pay for higher education in more complex ways than we do for an iPhone or a Chevy. But the basic equation still holds that every enterprise needs a sustainable business model. And that, things are changing right now for higher education. And that's not something, it's not unusual. I mean, nothing remains static, and organizations have always had to continuously reinvent their business model and how they do business with the world to take into account changes that are happening in the external environment. Some, I mentioned Apple and General Motors, for a reason. Some, like Apple, do so successfully. Others, like GM, perhaps less so. And I guess the challenge I throw out to you is, how does the UNC system be more like Apple and less like GM as these changes take place over the years and over the decades? When it comes to fixing the business model, there are a few areas that we'd identified in this Lincoln project as worth focusing on, and I would just mention them to you. First of all, I really do think that you have to take, from the standpoint of convincing a legislature, convincing the public, you've really got to take the lead in the way of becoming more efficient. And by more efficient, I don't mean just trimming a little overhead here or something there, but really questioning some of the kinds of things that you do. The way some people try to address that is by incorporating requirements to propose cost savings as part of the annual budgeting process, not let the annual budgeting process just be, here's our base budget and here's all the new things we want, but also here are some offsets. When I was governor, even in years when we were going to be able to grow the budgets, I would ask people to propose 3% and 5% cuts just so I could see what was on the margin for them at least. And maybe there was something they wanted that was worth putting even more money in by taking some out of some of those existing kinds of things. Certainly, there's an opportunity for a board like this to lead multi-year initiatives to look at fresh things. Something which is very hard, believe me, I know it in the academy, but really has got to be looked at is just pruning less successful programs. I look at these times when times are tough as actually being some real opportunities. You've all seen some National Geographic special that shows how, the bad winter makes the weak elk in the herd die off and strengthens the herd. Well, the same thing happens in organizations. There are things you can't do when times are good and money is there, but when times get tight, it's an opportunity just to look at some of these kinds of things and to, surely there's no organization that didn't start something 15 years ago that they had high hopes for and it hasn't turned out quite like they thought it might. And so maybe it's a candidate for some pruning. So one item is just I really think that you need to have credibility. You need to be leading the way in terms of how you become more efficient and more effective in the way that money is spent. Second of all, I really think you're going to see private philanthropy become a much more central component of the financial model of public institutions than it is now. Obviously, there are plenty of institutions, including a number of them right here, I understand, who are working on capital campaigns for various purposes and so on. And I acknowledge that. But private universities also have these very aggressive annual campaigns. They work very hard at long-term grooming of potential donors and the like. As I mentioned, I'm a graduate of Harvard, and believe me, I mean, there is not a week that goes by that I do not get some sort of thing. And it's really depressing because once you turn 65, which I have now, immediately they assume you're going to die tomorrow, and so they start asking you about all these questions about your estate planning and sending you brochures about how you can do this and that and the other. But I really think that for a public institution to start looking at what some of the big successful privates do and starting to put together the kind of operation that brings in these substantial annual fund the gifts, that brings in the large gifts and the large endowment to do that is going to be one of the necessities to do it. And in general, my experience has been is they're not very focused. The publics are they're not nearly as focused on this as the privates are. The third thing is I think to work with the legislature that if you can't restore funding to what it used to be, let's at least work together to find out how to get some consistency to the funding. I've talked to any number of college presidents, certainly when I was governor and since then, who can live with, X minus 10%, but they need to know that it's X minus 10% for the next 5 years, not X minus 10 this year, X plus 5 next year, X minus 15 the year after that. In Tennessee, we have, for K through 12 education, we have a thing called the Basic Education Plan, which is it's a funding formula for the schools. And it is, I mean, it's a mantra of both Republicans and Democrats that you fully fund that BEP every year. In the toughest years of my time in 2008, when just the revenues were falling, we fully funded the Basic Education Plan because we didn't think the public schools could live with the kind of variability that comes with, you get a 10% decrease this year, and we'll try to get it back in 2 years and so on. And we do that by having reserve funds that are used for it, and we put into them in good years and we pull out in bad years, but there's a bunch of processes that you all would know how to do that. Higher education, I believe, would benefit from a similar thing, and it's the sort of thing that I think a legislature you'd find a lot of willingness in a legislature about finding some ways to do that. The other secret to the BEP I'd mentioned to you is we also have a funding plan for higher education. The BEP is funded at 100% always as to what the plan shows, and the plan is realistic, and it's not funded at 99%. If you try to do it at 99, people will get on your back in a hurry. The higher education plan is funded at like 73% or something. I tried to get them to reset that, Talk the Academy, reset that at 100 and let's sort of pin it there. And they never had an interest in doing that because then, you just want to kind of dream about getting that other 27% back sometime. So what happens now, though, is it just flops all over the place. I mean, if 73 is the right number, why isn't 72 the right number? Or why isn't 70 the right number, and how big of a difference is it? But some plan which is consistent, in which you put money in good years and take money out in bad years to provide some consistency of funding is something I think you could ask the legislature to do. And I suspect, and certainly in Tennessee, you would find a lot of interest on both sides of the aisle in trying to structure something like that, and I really believe could be of help. I say all this about these things in 2008, when we started having to do some pretty tough things with all the departments, including higher education, the way I answered some of the whining, for lack of a better word, from the Academy was to say, look, here's the problem we've got. you justify yourself all the time as we are the centers of innovation. This is where innovation and entrepreneurship comes from, and that's what academics do. And I'd say, well, fine, show me some of that innovation. We've got a problem, and it's not going to go away, and it's not something that we've caused out of a bad attitude towards something. We need some help in doing this. You've got a lot of smart people. Be a partner with us, with government, in terms of solving these problems, as opposed to simply one more supplicant always coming up and saying, no, 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 my thing is more important than what it is that you're asking for over here. The third thing that I wanted to mention is this, and the last of these. As you might imagine, I have both done strategic plans and read innumerable strategic plans in the business world, in the nonprofit world, and certainly in government, where we would ask departments and agencies for these kinds of things. And the common failing, a common failing in all of those groups is that they produce these plans that are just pablum. They don't have any bite to them. They don't really differentiate. They don't really make choices. In the business world, you find some plan that says, our plan is we're going to become a consumer-driven company focused on quality. We're going to be a good place for our associates to work, and say, well, fine, but what does that all mean? I presume in higher education, as you say, you're going to be accessible and diverse and provide every student with the tools they need to succeed in the 21st century workplace and all those kinds of things. We'll find what does that really mean? The test I've always told people to use, I ask people to use, is to say, okay, if it's a strategy, the test is, can you take its negation? Can you take the opposite of that? And is that also a plausible strategy? Okay. And that means you've made a choice between two plausible kinds of things, as opposed to just sort of regurgitated, some very nebulous goals. Obviously, if you say we're going to be consumer-driven, it doesn't meet that test, because no company is going to say, well, we're going to ignore our customers and consumers, and I presume that if you talk about accessibility, you're not going to say, well, we plan to be a college only for white male students, or something, or something like that. But if, for example, in higher education, you said, as part of a strategic plan, we're going to focus on increasing the number of tenure track positions and decreasing the amount of adjunct professorships we have. Well, I can make, you can make an argument the other side of that. I mean, that actually is a strategy that represents making a choice between one or two different kinds of things that a reasonable person could argue either side of. When I was writing this down, I was thinking about World War II, and which is the last war we actually won. I think in large part because the country employed, a very good strategic vision of how to go about winning that war. And that strategic vision wasn't, we're going to field excellent troops and promote freedom and democracy everywhere and stuff. It was, we're going to fight Europe first and Japan second. We're going to deal with North Africa as opposed to X or Y or Z. We're going to concentrate resources on securing the North Atlantic supply line. And in so doing, you say, okay, I'm not going to worry about the Balkans right now, and I'm not going to worry so hard about Japan right now. You're making some choices. And to me, any strategic plan has that aspect of you've said some things you're going to do that really represent some choices among available alternatives, and then you really have a strategic plan. So the 3 points that I mentioned, just to summarize, first of all, is this issue of being outwardly focused. I guess to channel John F. Kennedy, it's ask not what your state can do for you, ask what you can do for your state in higher education. The second one is just to evolve the business model to be Apple and not GM, to not be static at a time when the outside world is changing. And the third of all is to, just develop some plans with some bite that actually makes some choices among available alternatives and set some directions. The other thing I wanted to do, and I'll do so quickly so we have a little bit of time to talk, is toward the end of my time as governor in Tennessee, we went through a significant series, we call them reforms, changes in any event, in higher education. And I wanted to mention to you what a couple of those were, with the idea of mind, again, if they may or may not be relevant, they may be usable to you, they may stimulate some thinking on your part about your own particular problems. I mean, there's no question that Tennessee and North Carolina and the systems are, are very different and have different things. But 18 months before I left office, I set up a group, a committee, that was sort of broadly based. I mean, it was certainly bipartisan. It had the chairs of the relevant committees in the legislature. It had the lieutenant governor, who's elected totally separately from, and in my case, from a different party, from the governor. It also had the comptroller. It had a couple of interested community people, but just a broad thing. And I actually chaired it. I mean, it was not a matter of I said, go off and send me a report. I mean, I actually spent the time and we sat down and met with them. To come up with some ideas about what we might do to move the agenda on higher education forward. When it started, everybody thought it was going to be about governance. Everyone wanted to say, well, let's change the way the board's selected, or let's change the board structure or something like that. And I think I moved them successfully beyond, I moved them successfully beyond that. Because certainly in the business world, whenever things are messed up, the first thing you think about is reorganizing, and it really ought to be about the last thing you do after you've decided why things are messed up and what you need to do to fix it, and is there some reorganization that will work toward that particular end in solving those problems. And we really moved on to this question of, well, let's stop talking about what higher education needs and try to figure out what is it this state needs out of this higher education system. We asked the taxpayers to put huge amounts of money into it. And what is it that we need to do in return for that? And the more we got into it, the more it came down to the subject of college completion. Now, there's lots of other things out there. But when you sort of picked what's the one thing that would really make a difference in Tennessee, we came down to this issue of getting more kids through college. The Walmart explanation that I gave to people of this was, I said, look, if you've got a store that's not doing well, okay, before you go out and advertise more or find a way to extend more credit, you ought to ask people who walked in the front door of the store and then walked out of the store without buying anything why they did that. And if you can figure out that, it'll help you a lot more with the strategy of where should you put your resources to make this more successful. Here's somebody who already was motivated to come to the store, already motivated to go to college, was unsuccessful in some way in doing so. Why? Okay. And it turned out to be a sort of a difficult question, because the immediate reflexive answer of everybody was, well, it's all about scholarships. We need more money in scholarship funds. But when you dig into it, it's not about that at all. That certainly can be a piece of it. But the reality is, in a state like Tennessee, where you have it's an agrarian, rural state, you've got a lot of people coming to college, and some of these ones who are having problems with the completion, who are the first person in their family who has gone to college. So what you got is you got some kid, and they're 18 years old when everybody's always messed up anyway. This is their first time going away to school. They may be the first person to go to college, so there's nobody to talk to in the family about what that's all about. They may have come from a school system that hasn't really adequately prepared them for it, so they're having trouble with some of the courses at the beginning. It's no surprise that after a while they throw their arms up in the air. They may have family situations back home in many cases that weigh on them and all those things. They throw their hands up in the air. And then in a sense, finding ways to support and solve some of those problems is likely to be a lot more effective in terms of moving people through to graduation and completion than simply saying, oh, well, we need to give them bigger loans or something like that. When we came down to that, it resonated with me tremendously. I'll be honest with you. I grew up in a very small town, 1,100 people. Went to a school system that had one 1 through 12 school was the entire school system. My graduating class was 38 people. When I went away to Harvard as a freshman, they told me at the time, I haven't researched it independently, that I was the first person from that entire school system who in history had ever gone to an Ivy League school. Okay, So I get to Harvard from that background, where I'd sort of tried to learn a little calculus on the side, and all of my compatriots had taken 4 years at, you know, at some private school somewhere. And it was the hardest 4 years of my life. I mean, it was a very difficult time in a whole host of ways. So I have this natural, I guess, sympathy for these kids who come out of these rural communities, and they're faced with all of the challenges that college and being 18 and everything presents, and just, you know, really feel that if we're doing our job, we ought to be supporting them. Now, in order to address those, here's the specific things we did. Number one, we changed the funding formula for schools away from the number of students who were sitting in seats on October 15th or whatever the date was we measured. And basically, we changed it to 100% of the variable revenue in the system. And variable revenue means everything but things like capital expenditures and maintenance on buildings and things like that. It's all the personnel expenditures were considered variable. Is 100% performance-based, and the performance is almost entirely retention and graduation rates. And the way I describe to people is I want the college presidents, when they're having a shower in the morning, to be thinking about how do I help these students be successful and keep them in the school and get them graduated and get them out in the community with the tools that they need. Now, obviously, the schools in our system, just like in yours, there are different schools that serve different populations. We don't put the same standard on everybody. I mean, UT has a much more aggressive goal than University of Memphis, which is a land-grant university that's dealing with a lot of inner-city kids and everything else. But we set goals which were basically like No Child Left Behind. They were advancement goals on retention and graduation rates. And I think actually, Margaret would know, but I think Tennessee is probably the state that's the furthest over there of any state in terms of performance-based funding for higher education. Would that be correct from, yeah? It's certainly pretty close there. It has worked very well. First of all, it has enjoyed broad support in the legislature from both sides of the aisle. Conservatives like it because it's accountability. Liberals like it because you're giving a helping hand to a lot of kids who need a helping hand. You can see in the budget proposals that have been brought forward that they're thinking a lot more, and there's a lot more thought going into now, okay, how do we fund, and how do we put things, what kind of support systems we need for these students to get them through, and so on. The one problem that it's had is that because the funding pool is essentially limited, you set the schools in competition with one another. If I get more money because of that, that probably means some other schools are going to get less, almost certainly means it's going to get less. And so it probably has hurt the cooperation between schools that is often needed to do joint programs and the like. If I had it to do over again, I would find a way to get into that, to get into those issues, some way to reward that kind of cooperation as well. But that changing of the funding formula has made a huge change in the system and in the law. The second thing which we did, and this I hesitated about mentioning it because I wasn't sure if it was relevant to you, but I'm thinking about it, I think it actually is we facilitated the transition from community college into the four-year colleges. I recognize that you don't have the community colleges in your system, but there certainly is no reason that you can't be a part of a process to help kids who start at a community college to get into the four-year system and to graduate. And where that arose out of was I just had this epiphany that I discovered when I got into this, that community colleges were not what I thought they were. I mean, I had thought of them in terms of some place where people go in the evening to get a degree after work and so on. And they're not anymore. What they are is they're places that are an alternative to four-year colleges that kids are going to, and it's their full-time endeavor is to go to this community college. And the problem was what they would do is they'd go spend a couple years at a community college, and then they'd go to UT or someplace, and they'd say, well, this course and this course and this course and this course don't qualify. We're not going to give you credit for those. And this poor kid has just spent now 2 years doing this stuff, and half the courses they took they're not going to give them credit for. Those decisions, those articulation agreements were between an individual community college and the dean of the appropriate school. So the big change we made is we just said, look, we are going to, every community college catalog is going to have every course clearly marked. I told them to put one in red and one in black. I don't think they actually did that, but clearly these courses are usable for credit in any four-year school, and we forced them to have the agreement so that all the four-year schools agreed on that and accepted those courses. So these kids, there's just truth in advertising. I mean, these kids knew what courses that they could take that were then usable. And then we combined that with if you complete the 2 years of that and these courses, you are guaranteed a spot in one of the four-year schools, except for UT, which has an admissions, selective admissions policy. And interestingly, once we did that, most of the privates in the state adopted the same set of policies. So you'd find, except for Vanderbilt, that all the privates in the state are doing exactly the same kind of thing right now. It really has eased that transition. And interestingly, even at UT, which is the most difficult of the schools, the students who come into UT through the two-year program do better than the students who entered as freshmen in a four-year program. So just facilitating that transition and just being fair to these kids about, you know, if you spend your money on this, what are you doing? A third thing that we did in that regard was we took the remediation completely out of the four-year schools. There are unfortunately always kids are going to need remediation of some sort. It's all done in the community colleges now, either on campus in the community college or on the four-year campus by community college instructors. They pay community college rates for those courses, and they get credit for those courses if they're credit-bearing courses. So you don't have some poor kid coming in looking at 4 years of school, but then you got to have 5 years because the first year is spent on remediation courses for which you get no credit toward your degree. You're trying to help move people along, and I think those have been very, very helpful. There have been other things we've done to facilitate the Oak Ridge UT interaction and so on, but I think these things that I've mentioned here with a better, that are all focused on this issue of retention and graduation rates, have got, as I described before in a strategic plan, I think if they've got some bite to them. We said that we're not going to worry about these kinds of things. We're going to try to focus on this, and it's been quite successful. I think the secret of the success of it has been we worked really hard to get buy-in on the front. I say this committee that I told you about was a lot of people with different ideologies and different views of the thing, and kind of came together to support that. We did this late enough in my term that we knew who all the candidates for governor were. So I brought them all in one by one and got them to sign on to the program. So all the governor's candidates had signed on to the program before they got into office. And then I think also just because it is focused outward. It's not about what do the schools want. It's about, you know, how do I get my kid who I'd like to have a college degree? How's this system going to help him or her to attain that college degree and the benefits that it's going to give them in their life. I had an example when I was mayor. I had three property tax increases during the 8 years that I was mayor. Two substantial, meaningful ones. One small one for something else. And the secret to getting it done, which I think is the secret to what I've just described here, was I never went in and said, I need more money to run the government. They were always done in the form of, I've got enough money, I can run the police department and the fire department and the public works department and all those kinds of things and the clerk of courts and all those things. Now, I'd like to build some new schools, okay? And it's not I want money for education. I want to build a new high school in Antioch. I want to build 4 elementary schools at these addresses, okay? These very specific kinds. You can pick or choose if you want those things. And what I found is people are very willing to spend money when there's a transaction. They understand what they're getting for it, and they can decide, do I want to spend 2 cents on my property tax rate in order to have these elementary schools built? And they quite easily said yes to those things. And I think there's a similar lesson in higher education there, that if you can come up with some things that are sort of very specific that you can do, I think it's a lot easier to talk legislators and really, legislators respond to their constituents, to talk to their constituents about the needs that you have to make those things happen. I want to just finish with this. I think you can see from the conversation how deeply I believe in higher education. And it's probably it's for a slightly different reason than people often give. It's not because of the private value of higher education. You know, a young man or a young woman will probably make more money with a college degree, and I think that's nice. But the real reason I believe so strongly in it is because it's a public, I see it as a public good, that the society we live in will be better, it will be healthier, will be more productive, will be a better place to live because of what higher education has to offer. You know, economics, if you took the Economics 101 course, you know that, the wealth of nations and the quality of life in nations it's all tied to productivity. There's no secret to getting additional wealth or additional quality of life in economic life in a nation. It's tied to productivity. We have, of the elements of that, we've got the financial capital in this country. That's not a constraint on our productivity. We have the natural resources in this country. It's not a constraint on our productivity. We certainly have the technology. That's not a constraint on our productivity. The constraint is the human capital, that we need more people who've got the whole variety of skills that higher education has to offer, and that's the critical path to continuing to grow the wealth of this nation and the quality of life and the options that people have in this country. So I really think the role of a group like this in doing a strategic plan is not only to create better lives for graduates, but also to create a better and more just society for this country and certainly for North Carolina. It's a personal issue with me. I just closed with one short story. I grew up, I told you, in that small town. I was with my grandmother. And living with us in the house was my Uncle Ozzie and his wife. Lyle Oswald was his name. Ozzie was a very intelligent guy. I learned a lot from him, and he worked very hard. I like to fancy myself as being intelligent and hardworking. He was every bit my match in terms of that. Ozzie worked as a milkman when they still delivered milk in the morning, and later as a bookkeeper for a Chevy dealership. I became a public company CEO and a governor, and as near as I can make out, the main difference in our two lives is that he left at the end of 6th grade because he had to, and I had a chance to go to Harvard. And that, to me, encompasses this. I mean, Ozzie was happy. I'm sure he would have loved to have more money, but his life was not constrained because he didn't feel he had enough money to do things. He owned his own home, and he had a cottage up on the lake and those things. But you ask yourself, what other things might he have accomplished if he'd had the same opportunity? I mean, how many millions of Americans are there today that work far below their potential to contribute to this society? How many might have been engineers or doctors or inventors or entrepreneurs with a little bit of help from higher education? And how much, if that were the case, how much better a place might America be if they were? Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Governor. I tell you, you've given us an awful lot to think about this morning. It's I had a chance to meet Governor Bredesen last night, and I got a little preview, but this was excellent. Thank you very
Nobody
much.
threw anything. That's the mark of a good speech if you're a politician.
We do have a few minutes for questions, so I'm sure there are a number out there. Champ.
Governor, you spoke of your changes in your model and focusing to a large extent on graduation rates and retention. I'm curious as to how in your model graduation rates are determined as we get into more and more non-traditional students. The old 6 years, which captured only incoming freshmen, and used years may not be the best because we have people that are going more than 6 years but taking fewer hours than the people who do go 6 years, and it leaves out that increasingly large number of people who don't come into a particular university as a first semester freshman. So how are you doing it in Tennessee?
The answer to that is I don't know how they're defining it, and as a matter of principle, I tried not to define that in the legislation. I've always been, I guess you're out of the, as I've described, you're out of the business world, and I've always been an admirer and disciple of Peter Drucker. And one of his principles of business is that the CEO of a company ought to do only those things that only the CEO can do. And I think that applies everywhere, that the governors ought to concentrate on doing only those things that only the governor can do. Even that is more than one person can do. So I was very careful in putting these things together to say, I don't need to be defining all of this stuff because I don't know enough and I'm probably wrong on some of it. Let me put in place a process by which, in our case, THEC, Tennessee Higher Education Commission, which was the coordinating body for the two systems we have, would determine these within the parameters that we set. So the answer is they have a model, but I don't know specifically what it is, and it may well have changed in response to some of those circumstances. Best I can answer. And the same thing I say applies to boards. There's a lot of boards I've worked with where somebody just has to get into the well, if all the details of things, and I really think there's really important work for boards, and certainly a board like this, to do in terms of the overall strategy for higher education without getting your shoelaces tied together with, getting down in the weeds of things that you can get other people to do probably even better than you can in a situation like this. Yes, sir.
Let's see,
I'm sorry.
I've got Harry, Henry, and then Marty.
Yeah, my question is, I love the performance-based deal. I know there's a lot of governors on here. We've talked about it as well. And, we have some colleges that set the standard when it comes to retention rate and graduation rate. And quite frankly, we've got some colleges that are really struggling with the retention and graduation rates that we continue to fund.
Right.
As part of your process, did you guys also look at performance-based pay for your leadership at the college level? One of the things I've struggled with is we continue to deal with very large compensation packages. And from my perspective, I think that's what, mediates to people who do really great things. They should be compensated off the charts. And if you don't do really great things, you shouldn't be compensated at that level. Did you guys take a look at performance-based pay as part of your process and metrics?
I can't tell you that there's no component of that in the way the presidents are paid, but it is presidents in our system. But that is nowhere near as significant as the other. I think the attitude was kind of that it was politically difficult to make it significant enough that it really drove behavior. I mean, I'm out of the business world, and the problem you always find when in government you try to do performance-based stuff in terms of bonuses and stuff is what somebody comes up with is you can get 6% more in your paycheck if you do the following 32 things, and you don't end up driving any behavior because nobody can figure out what it is they're supposed to do. I mean, in the private sector, if you're the marketing director, you get a 50% bonus if you get over this number of widgets sold, and you know what you have to do, and it's driving it. So we did not focus so much on that. I also don't think the presidents are people who are primarily motivated by the salaries that they get. We opted to go for a funding formula that way, and I think we'd be open to considering doing it the other way. But I'll put it another way: even in business, I don't think you can manage through bonuses. If you have a business, I remember when IBM was sort of messed up and having trouble with the transition into services and all those things. I mean, if somebody had come along and said, well, the way we're going to solve that problem is we're going to set up these bonus plans for all these executives, I don't think you would have been very effective in solving the program. What you'd have to do is decide on the strategy, and then if one of the tools to execute that strategy is to give some spiff to the managers who make it happen, I think that's okay. But I think of it as a secondary tool.
Henry?
I just wanted to get you to elaborate a little bit about how the performance-based funding was set up. Is that primarily done on student success? What was the criteria? How did you set it up?
It was set up through THEC, and it was a combination of retention in the system, because we had people who were coming in and then leaving in the middle of the year and so on and so forth. We wanted to retain them, and then graduation rates, and it does have a performance component to it. But the big issue is retention. What I wanted them to be thinking about was, how do I help these students to stay in this school and pass their courses and get a degree and get out into the workplace, to keep it simple that way. If you want to pursue this performance thing, I guess what I'm saying in a nutshell is there's a lot better people to talk to about it than me, because I put this in place toward the end of my time. A lot of the implementation has been done under Bill Haslam's tutelage, and somebody from THEC or John Morgan, who just left the Board of Regents over there, could come over and talk to you in great detail about that system and how it worked and what did and didn't work and what didn't work in the system. And I would certainly encourage you to do that. And I'd be happy to arrange it for you if somebody wanted me to do that. Yes, sir.
Marty? Your 3 points in your speech really resonated, probably more than the other ones that I've heard over the last 30 years.
From me or from others, you mean? Oh.
Focusing on what the state needs from the system is kind of a key element that sometimes gets overlooked. It's more inwardly focused. Evolving the business model is another major component that a lot of people are very resistant to. And then having a strategic plan with real choices, those are very hard things to accomplish in a bureaucracy. What are some helpful tips to get people to embrace that sort of a concept instead of fighting?
I mean, I don't know as there's a silver bullet. I mean, that's the process of managing people and managing the process of putting the strategic plan together and the like. And I'm not sure that I know a silver bullet to make that happen. I think that of all those things, the issue of convincing people that the business model really is changing and you can't just hope for a better year next year or hope the legislature will have a change of heart or something like that, that it's not going to happen. That's something I think you can do by just really nailing what's happening with the finances of the state and how broadly it's happening and so on. And again, there are places like this Lincoln Project that I'm on that could provide you with a lot of data that would help do that. I mean, I found on the Lincoln Project, which is a group of, it was a very high level group of college presidents and the like, and that it was a very hard sell that it was about more than the legislature has gone crazy or something like that it was that. And the notion of saying, no, these are structural, and if you're really doing your job, you need to be a partner with the legislature in solving our joint problem, as opposed to one more petitioner knocking at the door and saying, give me, I'm more important than this or that or the other. But I think of all those things, really nailing that and getting people to really believe that business model has got to be looked at is probably key to getting most of that stuff done. Because if you really believe the business model has got to change, then you can't just have platitudes in a plan. You've got to really say, well, okay, here's how I'm going to respond, to these things. And again, whoever is chairing these meetings and organizing them, I think you can lead people in the direction of not doing that. The problem I've always found with meetings and having them is that any group you call together, they immediately expand the domain of what they're talking about. You just get. When I was mayor, I called a group together having to do with the HIV/AIDS crisis for a very narrow purpose, and it was like, we're supposed to be Healthcare City USA. There's a whole population of people who are too sick to work, but too healthy to be on Medicaid or in final term care. What are we going to do about them? And after they meet for a day, they come back and say, well, first of all, we need sex education in the schools and and stuff. And you sort of say, well, wait, that may all be true, and ultimately, world peace would help with all this too. But I just asked you a narrow question. So I think this issue of always just kind of like keep narrowing the question down and don't let these groups sort of get off into the nether regions can be really helpful in terms of developing strategies to do these things.
Laura, and then Joe, and then Madeline.
Thank you. Governor, as we try and collaborate with K through 12, I think Tennessee's been very successful with one program that addresses remediation, the SAILS program. And I wondered if you could just tell the board a brief outline of how that works, because you're actually addressing these seniors early on to get them prepared for higher education, especially in math.
Well, again, I'm probably not the right person to give the kind of details out on, on that. It was, the problem of coordination of K through 12 is that the only place in state government where the two of them intersect is in the governor's, is in the person of the governor. I mean, from that point down, it's a totally separate kind of thing. Without talking about the civic program, we worked hard to try to identify coming in as freshmen that we could predict at that point who was going to need remediation and the like, and try to deal with that in the high schools, and then importantly, getting the four-year schools out of the remediation business and getting it into the community colleges, which has worked. So I'm not really answering your question. You may know more about the details of that program than I do. I apologize.
Program.
Good. Well, maybe you can tell the board about it.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Governor, I'm very honored to have you here and some one of your accomplishments to come and speak to us, and I really appreciate you doing that. But my question is, when we have a public university like we have, or any public institution, it seems to me there's a great pressure to democratize to the point that the institutions become mediocre. There's a sort of a leveling of standards, and I'm wondering if you incentivize schools to produce graduates, financially incentivize, I would almost guarantee that there will be more graduates produced because there will be more money received. However, how do you guarantee that the diploma actually represents real education as opposed to just going through a process? You told me, or you told us, and it resonated with me, that the 4 years you had at a very elite university were the hardest 4 years of your life. I'm sure you had a core curriculum where you took English and history and foreign language and mathematics and some very arcane sciences and so forth, very difficult. And the struggle and the difficulty is part of the educational process. How do you guarantee that a diploma is actually education and not just a stamp or something like the Scarecrow got at the Wizard of Oz?
I'll be honest, I worried a lot about that because you're right. If you incent producing more degrees, we're going to get more degrees. And in the end, I sort of came down and said, well, look, first of all, the people in these universities are professional people who have got standards, and we ought to place some dependence on them to continue to operate their institutions in a professional manner and consistent with the kind of high standards that they want. Knowing that probably some will cheat a little bit on it, or something like that. But in the end, I think we just said we made a choice, which is to say, if you help some kids get through in success and get that degree, that is better than you were really, really tough on them and you managed, to shunt them aside, and now they've got a lot of student debt and they don't have a degree and they're discouraged and those other kinds of things. But no, that is a concern, and in the end, we said we think our faculties, we think our college presidents are professional enough and honest enough to not let the standards go south.
Could I ask? It's just one brief, and again, thank you very much. That's a wonderful response. But it seemed you were making some distinction between most of the schools in the UT system and the University of Tennessee itself. How did you do that, and how did you answer the charges of elitism and so forth?
We have actually, our system is broken up into two systems. We have a UT system, which has the research university and the medical school in it. It has a couple of other small schools by historical accident, but they're almost afterthoughts in the system. And then all the big state schools are in the Board of Regents system, along with the community colleges and technology centers. So there was a natural distribution there. But I talked a lot about the need to have in the state a premier research university. I mean, something I haven't talked about at all here was another significant initiative was to work with UT to say you need to start climbing up the ladder of public research universities. I mean, they were probably 48th or 49th in the U.S. News and World Report, and believe me, I know that has all sorts of problems with it, but you know, I gave them the goal of I want to let's start out by being in the top 25, and pointed out to them, because a couple people were saying, well, you know, we're a Southern university and you know, rural state, and I said, well, you know, and you know, we're not Massachusetts, and I said, well, actually, if you count the 10 top public research universities, they're in places like Virginia and North Carolina and Georgia and Texas, and so on. There's no particular reason why Tennessee can't play in that game, and that the strategy for doing it was a much closer set of relationships with the big national lab at Oak Ridge, concentrating on hard sciences and the stuff that Oak Ridge had to offer. So I never made any. I mean, I acknowledged that we were identifying one university as an elite research university that was subject to some different rules. I mean, they have a much different admissions process and so on. And I mean, you've got that here. You've got, I guess, 2 very high research and 1 high research university in the state here. Although here they're all part of one system, so you don't have the natural kind of dividing line that we did.
Thank you. We're running over, but I don't want to cut this off if somebody else has. I know Madeline has a question and Hannah has one. So Madeline, why don't you go first, and then we'll let the dean at the end finish the questions.
Well, I'll actually make this easy for you. Mr. Knott asked both of the questions I had, so I thank you for your responses.
I'm just curious about, is it working? Has the emphasis on completion made a difference, and what kind of improvements have you seen?
Yeah, I tried to get. I apologize to you that when Margaret called me, it was like a week ago, so I didn't get all the sort of current research done that I might have liked to have done on that. But I did talk to John Morgan. The answer is yes, the rates have gone up, but I don't have hard numbers to give you here. I can certainly get some of those and send them over to the board. But I think there is no question but that the presidents have, I mean, their thinking is 45 degrees around to the side of where it used to be, and much more focused on these retention issues. I said the best evidence to me was just in budget proposals, which now have a lot of stuff in them, which is oriented toward the retention and the support and the mentoring that these kids need to help complete successfully.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Governor, for an excellent presentation. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll get started again. Thank you.
Be interesting. What are you doing this weekend?
Morning.
Take your seats. One thing I wanted to mention, I think Senator Barefoot arrived while we were in session, so we're glad to have the senator with us. He did confirm that he was taking care of the baby, so I've given him a pass. We also have with us George Hamilton, who is the chairman of our Board of Trustees at North Carolina Central. And George, we're very happy to have you. And are there any other trustees who are in the house this morning? Yes.
John Barbee, Vice Chair.
John, thank you very much for being here as well. Okay, what I think we're going to do, and I'm going to turn this over to Junius. We've got our other three presenters that Margaret talked about earlier. They are going to make a short presentation each. We'll have a little bit of time after each presentation for short questions on what they presented. And then at the end, Junius is going to moderate the panel. So that'll be great. And my schedule indicates that Jim Woodell is going to start. Jim?
Thank you, President Spellings, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board for inviting me. Very happy to be here today. I'd also like to thank in particular Leslie Boney and Aaron Hopper for reaching out, and with whom I've had some great conversations over the last couple of weeks about university economic engagement. I'm pleased to talk with you today about what we're learning about universities and economic impact. I read the March report to the UNC General Administration from the Boston Consulting Group, and it's no surprise to me that economic impact emerged as a top theme for UNC's strategic priorities. People want to know more about how we in higher education, and especially perhaps in public higher education, are making a difference in society, and an interest in economic impact is an opportunity for us to tell that story. Today, I'll use the phrase economic engagement a lot. In the work that I do with universities, we talk a lot about economic impact, in particular the difficulties in measuring impact, and I'll talk more about that later. But we probably spend more time on the idea of economic engagement, which is the idea that universities develop mutually beneficial, reciprocal partnerships with business and industry, government, and community organizations in order to achieve the shared economic and social objectives among these organizations. We focus on economic engagement because what we know is that without such engagement, there will be no impact. So I'll tell you first a little bit about APLU. Our membership reaches across North America with members in every US state and in Canada and Mexico. We have a diverse membership. About 200 of our members are individual campuses in varying contexts and institutional missions. The 7 member campuses in North Carolina represent this diversity, the diversity of the broader APLU membership. And that diversity is a huge asset for APLU in undertaking the work that I'm going to describe today, because it takes a range of assets and missions to have an economic impact. UNC benefits from an even greater diversity than we do at APLU, because you have institutions that have even smaller research enterprises and more of an emphasis on teaching and learning and community outreach. So, for example, the Western Carolinas and the Appalachian states play a huge role in the kind of economic engagement I'm going to talk about today, even though those kinds of institutions aren't members of APLU. There are also just over 30 university system offices that are members of the association. On behalf of our members, we conduct research and policy analysis and advocate for federal programs that support scientific research and other higher education issues. We work with Congress and the federal government in doing that advocacy. In addition to the DC-based policy work, though, we also focus efforts on supporting the development and implementation of institutional level policy. Generally, our work here with our institutions focuses on these 3 pillars: increasing degree completion and academic success, advancing scientific research, and expanding engagement. And I head up the Office of Economic Development and Community Engagement, and our focus is on that 3rd pillar of expanding engagement. These aren't silos, though. Our work in my office also extends to the degree completion and research pillars. It's just that we see those activities through the engagement lens. And so my office convenes 2 of APLU's member groups. One is called the Council on Engagement and Outreach, or CEO, we call it. And that is leaders from our campuses that do a lot of community development, community partnerships, and so forth. And I also convene our Commission on Innovation, Competitiveness, and Economic Prosperity. or SICEP as we call it for short, and we need a short name for that one. And SICEP convenes folks who are sort of heading up economic development and economic engagement activities on our member campuses. In SICEP, we've developed a framework for our efforts which are aimed at bolstering university commitment to economic engagement. And the first part of the framework is presented here. We believe that universities must first know well what they are doing in economic engagement. What are the programs and practices that help the university be connected to their region in this way and have impact? We also believe that universities should find ways to measure these activities and, importantly, their outcomes. They should also be able to tell the story of economic engagement and impact. And finally, universities should develop the capacity to do all of these things in an engaged manner, knowing, measuring, and telling through interaction with both internal and external stakeholders. And this is a very important, the engage piece is a very important part of this framework and how our universities do this work. The second part of our framework encourages universities to define broadly the work of economic engagement, taking into account an array of institutional activities and an equally broad array of economic and societal outcomes. We use this Venn diagram to describe university contributions to the economy. Universities develop talent, creating the human capital needed for the 21st century economy. Ask any one of the chancellors sitting right here or any other university what their institution does for economic development, and they'll likely answer by saying graduation. It's the main thing that universities do to help economies and communities thrive. Universities also contribute to economies through innovation and entrepreneurship, though, tapping the riches of science by working to bring discoveries to market. And importantly, universities also cultivate what we call place development. This is about bringing the social, cultural, and community assets to bear on creating great places to work and live. Not necessarily what we always think of as economic development, but what we've learned a vital foundation for prosperity. These aren't unique ideas, obviously, talent, innovation, and place. In fact, Leslie tells me that President Spellings uses a similar framework to talk about the promise of the University of North Carolina, that its contributions through development of people or talent, development of research and scholarship, which are certainly the starting point for innovation, and improving culture and health of the cities and regions that surround us, which we would call place development. It's important, though, to note that our presentation of these ideas is a Venn diagram for a reason. It's intentional. Talent, innovation, and place are parts, and the sum is greater than the whole. We encourage universities to work at these areas of overlap, to find at the areas of the overlap in these contributions, because we believe that in doing so, universities and their stakeholders will achieve a greater scale of impact in economic engagement. So developing the framework has led us to the creation of 4 tools. I understand you have copies of one of these, the Foundations for Strategy and Practice tool that we developed. And here's a web address where you can go and check out the other 3 and download them if you like. I'll quickly tell you about these tools. The Foundations for Strategy and Practice. This is a tool in a publication that we developed in partnership with the University Economic Development Association, another organization that's very much interested in this kind of work. And in this publication, we detail the framework I've just described, and we provide a taxonomy of university programs and activities that fit into the framework, including those all-important areas of overlap. The second tool is a pair of assessment tools. This is a couple of surveys that university economic engagement leaders can deploy with both internal and external stakeholders to gauge the institution's economic engagement efforts. The survey identifies about 40 characteristics of what we would call an economically engaged institution, and each characteristic has 2 scales in the survey. One is, how well are we doing this? But importantly, the second scale has to do with how important is this to us? And so using the combination of the data on those 2 surveys, institutions get a real clear sense of where the gaps are in their economic engagement enterprise. We also developed a new metrics field guide. Our commission convened national and local stakeholders for over 3 years to develop guidelines about the kinds of things institutions should measure. I'll talk more about metrics and measurement a little later, but what we did with this tool is laid out a set of measures that universities might consider when talking with stakeholders about institutional contributions to economic development. And finally, we developed a set of economic impact guidelines. This tool is focused on helping university economic engagement leaders undertake thoughtful and accurate economic impact studies, and it encourages universities to not just do sort of the traditional economic impact study, but take a look at a wide array of university contributions to the economy. So after developing these tools, in order to make sure that they didn't just sit on the virtual shelf, we developed a program to engage member institutions in applying the tools to defining, assessing, and improving economic engagement work at their campuses. So through the program, universities apply the principles in the framework to an assessment of their economic engagement efforts. Institutions are required to engage both internal and external stakeholders in this process. Among other work, they identify areas of accomplishment and also areas for growth and improvement. And importantly, they also provide evidence that they have for those areas of accomplishment and areas for improvement. They have to demonstrate how they know what they're doing well and what they need to do better. A panel of reviewers reads the applications for the designation and makes recommendations regarding whether the institution should be designated. Now, when an institution does fail to earn the designation, we encourage them to come back and try again after addressing concerns of the reviewers. Our goal here is to catalyze commitment to economic engagement work, and we want to work with institutions to help them get designated so that we can keep them engaged in that work. Once an institution is designated, they're eligible to apply for an awards program, and you'll hear a little bit about some of our award winners in a few minutes. Two UNC institutions, East Carolina University and North Carolina State, have earned the designation, and State went on to win one of the Innovation and Economic Prosperity Universities awards. So what I'd like to do now is just provide some examples of what this talent, innovation, and place framework looks like in action. I've so far resisted calling the framework the TIP or TIP framework because I get tired of acronyms working in Washington, but you all work for universities, so you get tired of them too. Although the folks at NC State may change my mind on this, their Office of Outreach Engagement has really embraced the framework as a central organizing tool for some of their efforts, and they frequently talk to me about the TIP framework, and it takes me a little while to catch on to what they're talking about. So some of the examples I'm going to give about what talent, innovation, and place looks like come from institutions that have achieved the designee status in our program and that have gone on to win awards for their work. And I hope to demonstrate with the range of examples that university economic engagement isn't just something that big research universities do, that universities of all types make these kinds of contributions. And this has actually been a challenge for us in this program, is recognizing the diversity of institutions and having standards that actually work across those. But as President Spelling said earlier, we really do have to be aware of the distinctions among our institutions and the kinds of contributions that they make. And so we've been very careful to try and do that. So my first example is from North Carolina A&T University. And I've included this example, and in the example of the illustration, that this example really shows us what happens when you take the talent and innovation pieces and link and leverage across them. A&T's Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation serves as a hub for commercialization of university technology and also the development of entrepreneurs. And one of the interesting things, Wayne Safransky from North Carolina A&T is on the executive committee for my commission, and I always enjoy talking with him about what's going on there. One of the interesting things is that technology transfer and entrepreneurship are not divorced at A&T, and that happens at a lot of our institutions. We have folks working on tech transfer, but then we have a whole bunch of other people thinking about what makes for good entrepreneurship. At A&T, those come together. There's an Entrepreneur in Residence program that engages students in learning about entrepreneurship from entrepreneurs and also benefiting both the academic and research enterprises. And undergraduates are active in a program called the VentureWell Innovation Fellows Program. And this group has done a lot of work to enliven the entrepreneurial enterprise on campus, including doing a study aimed at creating maker spaces on campus. So they're very active, and I think it's a good example of how you can leverage across talent and innovation. Clemson University is one of our IEP universities and an award winner in that program. They won the award for talent development. Their International Center for Automotive Research, or ICAR, creates a shared space for industry professionals, students, and faculty. So in the same facility, corporate engineers and researchers work side by side with learners and researchers from the university. ICAR brings together innovation with talent development by bringing together industry and the university under one roof. And the next example, also from North Carolina, focused on supporting innovation, and in particular, moving research discoveries to market. So Carolina's Express License Program, which is a standard license agreement for UNC startups, makes the best possible deal available to entrepreneurs working to commercialize discoveries from Carolina laboratories. The Express License helps accelerate innovation and technology transfer by making it easier for entrepreneurs to get going on developing the product rather than getting bogged down with licensing fees and complex negotiation. And you know, the world of tech transfer is a world that we need to do more. The governor implored us earlier to show him the innovation. We actually have to do a lot of work to show folks innovation in how we manage innovation at our institutions. And I think the Carolina Express license is a good example of that kind of innovation. Another example, this one from another IEP designated university, also focused on innovation. The University of Minnesota's MinDrive program aligns areas of university research strengths with the state's key and emerging industries, addressing grand challenges in robotics, food, and the environment, and also brain conditions. And this is not just about research projects, though. They're also about industry partnerships. Such partnerships are a key element of each of the collaborative and interdisciplinary research projects that go through this program. So from the beginning, industry is involved, and so that structure leads not only to high-quality research, but also accelerated innovation because industry is there from the beginning of the research project. Coming back to North Carolina, linking and leveraging across innovation and place. NC State was designated an IEP university in 2014, and in that year won the award for place development for the contributions to economic development made by State's Centennial Campus. As you likely know, Centennial Campus is a place where research and industry partnerships are tightly coupled. Innovative facilities, including Hunt Library, catalyze collaboration and innovative problem solving. So interestingly, place development as an idea has being defined in multiple ways by our institutions as they go through this program, sometimes focused like this on creating places like Centennial Campus that help catalyze innovative and entrepreneurship, innovation and entrepreneurship efforts. Other places, like at Auburn University, the place development definition focuses on the idea that universities help create great communities where people want to work and live. And so this example from Auburn, I think, fits a little bit more into sort of a community development model and way of thinking about place. Auburn University was designated last year and won the award for place. Auburn's Rural Studio project links and leverages university assets across talent development and place development by sending undergraduate architecture students into the community to undertake design build projects for the underserved population of rural West Alabama. Students get hands-on learning and communities get the benefit of good design and construction. One of Rural Studio's projects was the creation of a $20,000 house, a small house that can be built for less than $20,000 worth of materials. And for one final example, let's come back to North Carolina. I like this example because it really demonstrates how you can link and leverage across all of those categories of talent, innovation, and place. East Carolina's School of Dental Medicine has established community service learning centers across the state where dental students hone their clinical skills, applying the latest technology and knowledge being developed at and used by the School of Dental Medicine while providing desperately needed healthcare services in rural areas. Economic development doesn't matter if your community isn't healthy. So ECU's community service learning centers represent an important economic engagement activity. So I said that I would talk a little bit about the challenges of measurement. Our Commission on Innovation started with a charge, really, when the commission was started, to find better ways to measure the ways in which universities engage in economic development, and to do a good job of telling the story of that work. So this has been a real central interest for the commission and a significant part of our efforts. And there are big challenges here, like I said. I'd like to talk about a few of them by way of context for a broader discussion about how the university system can encourage and support university economic engagement. So first, we have traditionally defined university economic impact. We've traditionally defined it in a somewhat narrow and circumscribed way. The starting point for any university economic impact study and report is spending. How big is the university's payroll, and how much does it spend on goods and services? There's a significant impact here, to be sure. I mean, many of your universities, for example, are the largest employers in their region. And I know that there was the 2015 study by EMSI for UNC that the governor mentioned earlier today, and it demonstrated very clearly this kind of impact. The number, I think, was just over 27 or almost 30 or almost $28 billion in added income to the state. But universities really do so much more for economies than just spend money, right? So as I've been illustrating, universities generate innovation and entrepreneurial opportunities, they address labor market needs through talent development, and they create great places to work and live. But how do we measure all of those contributions so we can define impact more broadly? And that's an open question. Another challenge that we deal with in measuring impact is that the challenge arises when we try to move beyond a spending frame for economic impact and look at the fact, and we start to look at the fact that many of the economic benefits of universities are not immediate. So research undertaken at universities, especially in fields like life sciences, can take years and massive additional investments before commercialization can happen. So the full economic contribution of our graduates also, or the work that we do in communities, can also take time to be realized. And measuring things over time can try the patience of policymakers and tax the systems that universities have in place to capture data and analyze it. So another challenge that comes up is how direct are those contributions. So if the path is long from university output to economic impact, it's also indirect. Universities alone, in many cases, cannot realize the benefits of all of their assets. We rely on partners in government, nonprofits, and business and industry to help us turn intellectual assets into economic prosperity and well-being. So the term collective impact is used to describe this kind of indirect path. And while the idea of collective impact is powerful, a powerful representation of how impact happens, it also suggests a tracking challenge. How do we follow these indirect paths to fully understand the role of individual players in creating economic and social outcomes? Again, this kind of challenge frustrates policymakers and taxes our systems. Unfortunately, despite our efforts to address the measurement challenge, we don't have complete answers. One of the great things, though, about the Innovation and Economic Prosperity Universities program is that we're seeing institutions focus on measurement. They're trying to identify the right evidence for their accomplishments and areas for growth. And the program encourages development of a culture of evidence, and institutions are engaging in new ways with stakeholders to identify the right evidence and indicators and to capture better data about what works. I said earlier that without engagement, there is no impact. And we're also learning that without engagement, there is no meaningful measurement of impact. So which leads me to some final thoughts. In our conversations over the last few weeks, Leslie Boney has encouraged me to talk a little bit about the role of university systems in all of this. And to be honest, I felt least confident about this part of my talk. I interact with individual universities much more than I do with system offices. But I did a little research, did some reflection on what I've observed about systems and economic engagement, and came up with a few thoughts on this front. So here's what I have. First, as system offices turn their attention to encouraging and supporting individual campuses to become more economically engaged, I think that they need to see their contribution as one of more of facilitator than of regulator or allocator. So the system really has to facilitate this kind of work across the state and not sort of push regulation in to make it happen. Economic engagement is highly context sensitive. Just as we have to recognize that our institutions are all distinct and they have distinct missions, we have to realize that those contexts means that the way we do economic engagement is sensitive to those distinctions. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. So system offices must facilitate the work rather than regulate or manage it. In the world of technology-based economic development, we talk a lot about ecosystems. The idea is that organizations do not make economic development happen all by themselves. There are complex and dynamic networks and interactions at play. This is also true of economic engagement, and a system role in this work is helping to build those ecosystems, helping to make connections across campuses and between campuses and others. And in being an ecosystem builder, the system also plays a role as an intermediary, which is another important role and also a role that we talk a lot about in tech-based economic development. System offices can convene campuses and connect them with stakeholders in state government, the civic sector, and in business and industry. So acting as that mediator between the universities and other players is a very helpful role for the system. Also in this convening role, systems can see broadly where the assets are and help align university assets with state needs. So, and importantly, System Office can help at a statewide level align the resources necessary to fulfill the promise of these assets. So doing strategic resource planning becomes vital in terms of reflecting back on all of what we said about institutions being distinct and having distinct assets. We have to understand how those assets align with what the needs are in the state. And alignment of resources is related to another important system role, helping us to be good stewards of public money by setting benchmarks and standards for quality and outcomes, and importantly, helping make measurement happen. So we've talked a lot about these challenges of measurement. I think that overcoming these challenges can really only happen at scale, and system offices have the ability to bring scale to measurement. Speaking of scaling, I was talking with a friend and colleague about the role of systems, and he shared for me what was a new way of thinking about scale. The colleague had worked at the National Association of System Heads, an organization for people in the role that President Spellings is in. And in his work at NASH, my friend Jonathan learned about scaling out versus scaling up. Scaling up means focusing on individual units and building their capacity. Individual campuses need to be able to scale up solutions they find working for their students and other stakeholders. System offices, on the other hand, need to focus their energies on scaling out, building capacity across institutions by helping to transfer the ideas that are working on one campus across other campuses. But importantly, scaling out isn't just picking up best practices in one place and plopping them down in another. It's about holding up these best practices as examples and then doing the harder work of translating and adapting them across different contexts, communities, and missions. So to finish up, just a couple of quick examples of the system role. First, the State University of New York, at the State University of New York, Chancellor Zimpher talks about systemness. The idea that the 64 campuses of that system, including everything from community colleges to research-intensive universities, can do much more together than the sum of what they can all do individually. So implementation of Chancellor Zimpher's systemness concept means leveraging the strengths of individual campuses and making those assets available across the system. So when you take the idea of systemness and combine it to the broad concept of economic engagement I've talked about today, you begin to see how facilitation of sharing of assets across institutions within a system can be a powerful economic driver. Some institutions, because of their context, community, or mission, are going to have stronger assets in either their talent development, innovation, or place development capacities. Or they might be doing better in linking and leveraging across two of those areas than others. Across multiple campuses, though, you begin to develop a tremendous strength across all of the categories and achieve the highest level of connectedness. My second example comes from my experience studying the University of Massachusetts, which I did for my doctoral research. The title of my dissertation was Wilson's Mantra, and then there were a bunch of gobbledygook academic words after a colon. But Wilson's mantra referred to the then system president, Jack Wilson. And throughout the interviews I conducted for my research across multiple UMass campuses and with state stakeholders, many people mentioned that President Wilson, whenever he gave a talk, would say, "The path to economic and social development in Massachusetts runs through UMass." And what happened was that as he put this image out there, leaders on individual campuses started to try and figure out what that meant for them and how they would live up to this idea. President Wilson was telling an overarching story, a kind of transcendent narrative that the institutions then began to enact. Of course, President Wilson did a number of other things to encourage the effort, including convening people across campuses to work on research and economic development collaborations, and establishing a science and technology fund to encourage the kind of work that would lead to the outcomes he was envisioning. But I think the important element about the UMass example is this idea that the system office was telling the story of the identity of the collective university, and that story inspired collective work among the campuses to realize the vision. So with regard to UNC and economic development, I think it's about figuring out what story you want to tell, and then helping campuses see and enact their roles in that story. And I'll look forward to seeing how that proceeds, and I thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any specific questions for Jim at this point, recognizing that we're going to be having a panel discussion here in a few minutes? Anything at this point? Thank you, Jim. Fran O'Sullivan. Developing talent for economic impact.
So great, thank you. I thought what I'd do today is just spend a brief time talking about IBM in North Carolina, a little bit more on how we've partnered with the universities, then go to what our future student needs are, and then areas that we have been doing joint research, but actually where we can, I think, even double down and do some more. So if I talk just, IBM is, we have 3 campuses in North Carolina: Charlotte, Greensboro, and then, of course, here in Research Triangle Park. Our campus in Research Triangle Park is actually IBM's largest campus or site, if you will, in all of the United States. So it is, has every business unit present. I like to say that as IBM has transformed, in fact, we're just 51 years old in RTP, so has our RTP site. When I hired with IBM, we were 80% hardware, and today we're 10% of our revenues come from hardware. So here in North Carolina, we went from a hardware manufacturing site, then we added a state-of-the-art software development campus, then went to services, and today we have all of the cognitive solutions based on the cloud platform, including Watson, Watson Health, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, gaming. I could go on. On Watson, we like to say Watson has a very, actually very nice headquarters in New York City and in San Francisco. But if you want to know where Watson is doing the work, it's right here in North Carolina. Right? If you look at from a new way of working, we were very global, centralized, but we've now gone to what's called agile. And you're bringing small teams together on site working. And I'll talk about that when I get to the future needs, because we really do need T-shaped students coming out of the universities. Something people might not realize is that a quarter of our employees here in Research Triangle Park are actually less than 5 years with our company, and they're mainly coming right out of the university systems and, of course, right out of the university systems here in North Carolina. We match that with 33% that have 25 years or more, so highly skilled, seasoned, and we're finding this combination is especially powerful for us. If I kind of go counterclockwise, innovation for 23 years, IBM has been the #1 patent producer in the world, and we are actually generating 11% of those patents out of North Carolina, so highly innovative, high-tech site. I'll come back to this as well, but we really have a major focus on STEM, and especially with women and underrepresented minorities, a number of initiatives, and I'd like to do even more as we go forward. And as you would expect from a company like IBM, very heavy in community leadership. I will offer up one of the things I'm really trying to do. We have many leaders on our site here, is get out and help by being on nonprofit boards. We currently have over 35 IBMers that are on boards, and if you are, have any that you are in need of enterprise experience, executives, we'd be happy to line up. I have a waiting list of ones that have volunteered to do more. And of course, we do a lot of hours giving back. And then just one very quickly on the environment. The reason I like this is because it's totally grassroots. We have an IBM RTP Green Team, they call themselves. Our campus is actually a certified wildlife habitat, so we have all the paths, and we work with Boy Scouts and now Girl Scouts as well to be able to get their gold stars and to move up to work there. So very, very proud of all the environment work. Now let me talk about the partnerships that we have, and I kind of split it in 3 areas. What we do around collaboration annually, we've done it for at least 15 years. We have an IBM University Day. We typically have about 300 participants bringing all the universities together, along with we extend this out to other enterprises and discuss areas that are of interest to all. IBM, actually, we have a campus on the NC State Centennial campus. We opened it in May, and I committed to work there 1 day a month, and so far I've done it. I've been there May, June, July, and I get a good food truck lunch, so we're very happy about that. We offer cloud services free of charge to universities. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but very important, serious gaming. And then, of course, we have some adjunct professors and guest lecturers. On recruiting, unfortunately, it was hard to get statistics, but North Carolina State is consistently in our top 3. Normally, our #1 college that we recruit from across IBM. The real competition there is University of Texas, Austin, but we're pushing to keep North Carolina up there in the #1. UNC Chapel Hill is consistently in the top 20. We do about 200 students a year, so I just put over 2,000, but I know whenever we do any kind of alumni spirit event, it seems like there's way more than 2,000 graduates from North Carolina on our campus. And then on the bottom there, right, especially as we go into next year, really want to focus on getting diverse STEM students. We got to meet with University of North Carolina, Wilmington yesterday. It was a great discussion, and the work that's going on graduating diverse students there, and we're going to be coming down shortly, seeing what we can do to set up recruiting tables. But it's just so important for our success, and I think the state's success, that we really focus on getting women and underrepresented minorities interested in the STEMs. And then on research and technology, that we have all kinds of in-kind grants, whether it's offering up software, curriculum, services for universities. We've done over $30 million in cash grants, faculty awards, our shared university research awards. I could go on and on. But you know, we are committed to this and want to help make it work. From a future students' needs, I mentioned T-shaped, but I really can't emphasize that enough. In today's work environment, you know, there's very few jobs in IBM there. You just need the deep skills. They just don't exist anymore. If you think of, if we're doing an offering for a client, we typically have the development, the developer, the tester, the marketing, the offering manager, project manager, all working together. When I hired, we had, you know, huge units of just development or just testing, and you could just have deep skills. But now, to be successful, you have to have some end-to-end knowledge. You have to understand how things work together, how clients will work together. So deep is important, but being able to work cross-discipline and understanding that is critically important. And maybe it seems obvious, but communications is also critical. And sometimes, you know, we've had very, very sharp students, but if you can't communicate, they're just not going to be successful in the enterprise. So being able to communicate, no matter what your discipline is very important. If I go over to the top right, of course, being a high-tech company, we need high-tech students coming out, but IBM does a lot to help enable that. We have the IBM Academic Initiative, and again, that's offering up anything from free software, cloud services. We have now two on Watson, so Watson Analytics Academic Program, Academic Engagement Program, Serious Gaming. We're conducting Internet of Things education roundtables. We have an IBM Cloud Academy. So it's very important to us. We want to work on that. Maybe the bottom one, IBM System Z, that's our mainframe. That actually is in conjunction with many of the financial institutions, and right here in Research Triangle Park, MetLife. in that their employees that understand mainframe technologies are retiring, right? As that's how long the mainframe has been around and successful. And so specific programs so they can hire students coming out of the universities that know how to work on the mainframes. So that has been very important to us. I talked about diverse STEM graduates are very important to us. We need entrepreneurial spirit. And then maybe finally, just technology is changing so fast that we really need students that understand they're going to have to continually learn. They're saying half the students that entering the workforce accept jobs that didn't exist when they started college, right? Using technologies that haven't been invented. You know, when I started, we did office memos, right? And then we went to now called the dreaded email. Well, the millennials were hiring, you know, we found out they won't even read an email if they don't know who it came from, right? It is not, we can't communicate with emails, right? We have communities, we do texting, we do instant messaging. So it's, you know, always having to recognize that you have to learn. And quite frankly, it's a challenge for us internally for some of our aging employees, because as IBM's transformed, our jobs are changing. Maybe a simple example I like to use is that, you know, today's largest taxi company owns no vehicles. Well, what if, Uber, obviously, right? But what if your expertise is fleet management, right? If you're the vice president of fleet management, you better retrain yourself because we don't need you anymore, right? So you have to have this, and I think if everybody is, you know, right, and just the explosion of data in every company, no matter what your industry is becoming a technology company because technology is changing the way your company operates, that you need to have students that continually learn. Just a little bit on joint research. You know, we certainly recognize between enterprise and universities that there are intellectual property policies that prohibit general collaboration, but I also believe, as you can see in the first one, we can be creative and we can carve out spaces and we can really work together and start doing some great things. And I loved the TIP framework to help with that. Some we've done, anything around open. IBM is very much behind open standards. We're doing joint research there. We've started this new one. Extreme Red is the first one with North Carolina State, but we're in construction with University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with Extreme Carolina Blue, and UNC Charlotte is under discussion for Extreme Green. But that's working on, within classrooms, IBM will sponsor projects that match up to our strategic initiatives, so we call it Extreme Red. So anything, for example, around Internet of Things, cognitive, analytics, big data, we'll run these projects through with the students, and I think it'll be really positive as we go forward. And those are just some other examples of areas that we've done research. But what I want to wrap up with is something that we're very excited about in IBM in North Carolina, and that's around serious gaming. I don't know if you all know, but Wake County is becoming the eastern hub for serious gaming. This is a few years ago now, but one of my neighbors is co-founder of a large gaming company, and I had met him at a neighborhood party, and he said, well, guess who my biggest client is? And so I was being a bit naive, I guess, so I was like, well, I don't know, 21-year-old male, who's your biggest client? And it was the U.S. government, right? It's because serious gaming is changing the way we do all training, learning. It's if you look at it from the components, there's certainly the platforms, so the modeling and the simulation, but it's people-centric engagement, right? It is really the way you can revolutionize how you learn and engage, and of course, enabling on a cloud just makes it accessible to everyone. So just a few things. We run our serious gaming out of our North Carolina campus. And she is now the UNC Chapel Hill Social Entrepreneur in Residence, right? So I thought that was kind of cool for 2016-17, but there's all kinds of summits. We're doing design workshops, and I just think that there's even more to do. The three key areas for us from an IBM is all around citizen engagement, workforce training, and then building dynamic practice playbooks. So as you're thinking and going back, anything that you want to do, double down from a university perspective on gaming, I am here to volunteer. Just get a hold of us, and we'll see what we can do together. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover.
Thank you very much, Fran. Any specific questions for Fran at this point? If not, we'll wait for the round table. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve?
I'm interested in this gaming issue because I don't do gaming. But my understanding is what you do is you develop the software for, and you come up with different games. And isn't the target market for those games, I know the government, you say the government, U.S. government uses them, but isn't it mostly people in their 20s and 30s who do the gaming?
If you just call it gaming, that's true, right? It is very, very much a consumer base, and that is a huge market. But from IBM's perspective, we call it serious gaming. So it's really transforming how governments can be engaged with their citizens. And so the engine is the game, but if you think about it, I don't know the exact statistics, but they say in, for example, training in a emergency, what do we call it, EMT? What does it M stand for? Emergency response. That if they are trained through simulation or a serious game, they're much more successful. They retain it, and they don't have to go through repeat training and testing. So think of it, maybe simulation is a easier way. So training of pilots, training of any kind of training or engaging with a citizen, we would put under a serious gaming context.
So
does that help?
What percentage of what you do is the simulation, like we did one at Elizabeth City State on the air traffic controlling? When we landed a plane, I crashed my plane.
I do too. I'm not very good at real games.
What percentage of it is the recreational gaming? I mean, isn't that the most? I mean, where people.
I wouldn't know the answer to that because from an IBM perspective, we just kind of do the underlying engine and platform. So we actually work with companies that sell real games to people to play. And we use that same engine as a that would be part, or the platform that would be used for the training or citizen engagement or what's our third category? For crowdsourcing, for example, can also problem solving, you use the engine for gaming underneath it.
Marty.
Oh.
Learning.
So, what are some of the things?
Well, I think certainly getting more curriculum and generating more students that are experts in how we can, create more offerings around gaming is from an IBM perspective. But if we wanted to do some joint projects on working with the government, for example, on how can we help engage citizens more, that might be an area. We're pretty much wide open as long as we can, have the vision and an agreed to this is the outcome that we want. I'm serious about serious gaming. Mm-hmm.
Marty's one of the top Pokemon guys.
There's not any rare Pokemon here. Something like that.
Yeah, great. Yes.
Okay. Oh, Rodney, sorry.
Yes, Fran, thank you so much for joining us today, and most importantly, thank you for hiring so many of our students from throughout the system. My question for you is, as you look at ways of having more diverse applicants and from our HBCUs, I'd like to encourage you to at least meet some of the chancellors here today who are from our HBCUs, and also perhaps consider going there for some of your recruiting. I know you've mentioned that you're recruiting at some of the other schools. I just wanted to make sure that you were looking at them as well. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
Rodney. Thank you, Fran.
Great, thank you.
Our next presenter is Karen Levert. We've heard about economic impact from Jim Waddell and from the university point of view, and economic impact from Fran from the IBM's point of view. Now we're going to hear about it from the other end, because Karen, in addition to being co-founder and CEO of Southeast Technoventures, is also a former North Carolina Entrepreneur of the Year. So Karen, thank you for being here.
Thank you. That means I'm rather crazy.
I didn't say that.
So it's great to be here. I see some familiar faces, and when we get to the Q&A, I know there's some folks in the room that can help answer questions as well. I'm Karen Levert. I started 2 innovation labs here in North Carolina, one around the medical space called Southeast Tech and Ventures, and another in agriculture called Ag Tech and Ventures just recently. So I'm going to take 15 minutes but go really fast. So this will be really broad. I want to tell you a little bit about what I know about commercialization in universities. And I don't know everything. This is just what I know. And then also give you a little feel about how you all are doing as a state or UNC system compared to universities outside of North Carolina. And then I'm also, I was one of the steering committee members for the University Innovation Council. And I'll introduce some other people that are in the room on that as well. So without any further ado, from an entrepreneur standpoint, Mr. Bissett mentioned that I've been an entrepreneur. I was in corporate America for 14 years and ended up here in North Carolina working with Nationwide Insurance. They moved me here and tried to move me out, and I decided I better try to build my own kingdom to stay here. It's such a great place to live. So, but shortly after getting here, I bought franchise rights to a company that we really were eradicating sugars and starches, grease, and drain lines, believe it or not. I sold that company some years later, was in Silicon Valley, still stayed here, but lived there temporarily in a software company, and then looked at, the wonderful universities we have. And I know Duke isn't part of the UNC system, but the Dean of School of Engineering there kind of had the brainchild of, can you do something from a private standpoint that works with all universities to help move some of this research out of labs into the marketplace? So that's all roads lead to here. So we sit in the middle of industry that has a continuous need for innovation, and academia that has untapped university IP and research. And when I say the word untapped, that doesn't mean anybody's doing a bad job anyplace. Our tech transfer offices actually do a nice job. Their problem is most of what they have to work with is nascent. And when I say it's nascent, it's very early. It's a little too early for venture to invest in, and it's too early for industry to license. So that's kind of where we come into play, is how can we work with the tech transfer offices and further develop some of this early stage research. So I'm going to talk about the business model a little bit, so you know everything I know about this. Now this is just our model. There are other models to commercialize technologies. We work 100% with university inventors. So if you're a university inventor and you have an idea that you think is commercializable, we have a desire to work with those inventors. And because I mentioned that the technologies are nascent and early, we've got to find a way to get those funded early on. So we use a program called SBIR-STTR. Who isn't really familiar with when I say those words? So it means everybody, okay, we have a few people. Good, because I can use my next slide and tell you about what that is. Otherwise, we'd have been in trouble. So, so from a SBIR STTR perspective, SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. Small Business Technology Transfer is STTR. And this is a federal funded program. Now, it's not for nonprofits. You have to be a private company to participate, but we partner with nonprofits under this program and subcontract to universities. And so when we subcontract to a university, when you hear the word sponsored research, sometimes that comes from federal sources, but it also comes from private industry, companies like mine that partner with you. This program, the federal government has invested over $30 billion in it since the mid-'80s. Lots of dollars, right? And I'll tell you the agencies, it's a grant. It's not a loan. It's not investment where they take equity, but it was developed in the mid-'80s or initiated to spur economic development, to try to keep us ahead of the technology development curve. It's only for high-risk, high-payoff research. So if you have something that's the downside. If you've got to have something, that's what makes it beautiful for universities, for us to partner with the universities, because most of what you're doing is high-risk, high-payoff research, right? You have to be in the U.S. to participate in this program and have less than 500 employees, which is the government's classification of a small business. Now, most of the SBIR, STTR awardees have less than 10 people. They're really small companies, a lot of times that work with the universities. The proof of concept, so the phase one, when I said there's $30 billion, you can see how many, over 100,000 plus awards. The phase one is about $150,000. So when we do a phase one proposal, this is over 6 months to a year is what you get for proof of concept. If you're able to prove that, then you can go back and get a phase two. So I'm going to show you some of the companies we've developed, just at a real high level. We don't have time to go into detail, but this is sizable money if you can get up to $1 million to help move these technologies out of university research labs. And the hit ratio, so they're hard to hit. 10 to 15% nationally get awarded. So, one out of 10 basically. So that's SBIR, STTR. The agencies are very familiar to you that play in this program. So huge agencies, they all set aside 2% of their budgets to fund SBIR, STTR. So that's what makes it a sizable program. And I'll show you where, for the most part, the North Carolina universities, in terms of, we've got SBIR that they fund, but they also fund your sponsored research from the federal side, right? You're familiar with, that's where the majority of the dollars that are sponsored in universities come from agencies like these. The other thing I want to point out with this is the diversity of it. And a lot of times we talk about technology, we think it's science. It's not always science. So there are a number of agencies and initiatives that fund outside of just typical science. So what I'm going to talk about next, so these data and graphs came from, I think this is, Aaron, the 2015 President's Report on Research and Sponsored Programs. So this is an annual report that you all do every year. So when I show you, actually, I'm not there yet, sorry about that. Go from grant dollars, just quickly, I'll give you a little more information on our model. Industry partners are involved. We didn't do this right in the beginning. We didn't involve industry, the IBMs and folks early on to say, what do you think about this research or technology? Because once we started doing that, then you have pull, right? Ultimately, you want to be able to develop something so that they can license or acquire it. So we ended up going about 10 years before we had our first kind of acquisition in the model. We have investors or private company. They fund STI in return for equity. And then our goal is to spin off a new co that is partly owned by universities. So we own a piece, the university who helped develop the technology owns a piece of it. The intellectual property gets licensed into our company and then into the new company. And then when the exit happens, which we want, we can drive revenues back to the university. And then, of course, dividends to the investors that put money there. I mentioned 10 years it took. We had a couple of medical device companies that were acquired, one by Leica Microsystems and the other from Illumina. And I'm not going to go over these. These are technologies now that we're advancing. See, Central, you're in the middle there. And then what we did is we're in a wonderful state, and from an agriculture perspective, we realized, actually Syngenta, who is in RTP, said, have you ever thought about doing your model in the ag space? And so we started Ag Tech and Ventures in 2014. The first spinoff, I had no idea that rubber is the second largest commodity that we import into the US after crude oil. And rubber, natural rubber, is not sustainable. It's only grown in the tropics, and there's South American leaf blight that's overtaking the rubber trees. So this is actually expressing rubber from sunflowers, which we can grow abundantly in North Carolina. So we're excited about this company. It's raising its first round now. And RxMaker is in the IT space, digital farming. So we want to be at a place where we can tell farmers how much nutrient fertilizer to apply, and also image analytics and looking at, oh, this is a weed versus not a weed, and you can apply whether it's a herbicide or fertilizer based on that. Now, this is where we want to be. So I mentioned that you all have, or the universities have sponsored awards. So this is a wonderful trend. Over the last 18 years, universities now are at $1.4 billion in research from sponsored programs. The green arrows there, that's the stimulus package was in effect. But you can tell you didn't need stimulus money, you see. We had a little dip right after it went away, but then you're on a wonderful trajectory again. So I think that's a really good sign. And then you may ask, well, what's behind the $1.4 billion annually? So in 2015, you can see a large majority of it is federal, and you saw those agencies before. So 60% is coming from those federal agencies. And then if you look at 6% here, I'll look at that's from the state. And then the 7, like companies like ours, or any businesses, could be small business or large business, that when they do sponsored research with universities, that's making up that part of the pie. So you can see the federal government, though, is the lion's share of the driver for what's happening from a sponsorship perspective. All these numbers eventually add up to 1.4. I just picked the bigger numbers, but if you look at the United States, looks like there's a typo up there, a spelling fanatic. So United States federal government, if you look at, you can see it's no surprise that NIH is the biggest supporter really for our universities. Where the opportunity is, if you start looking strategically, look here at Department of Defense. That's one of the largest agencies. And from a state perspective, if strategically you're looking at an area to maybe concentrate on, North Carolina has huge military presence. Also, our veteran hospitals are here as it relates to, some of our medical technologies. I know Kathy Seidner's in the back. They're doing a report with the Defense Applications Group. That's going to come out in November. We'll go to the Board of Governors and Chancellors, and so I think they're going to do a good job, or I know, I've seen the initial draft of kind of level state, where are we today and how we can improve in this area if that's important to you. But it looks like an opportunity. I'm not going to go over all of this. There are great folks in this room that can give you all this information if you don't have it. But just wanted to give you just a feel for a little bit what's behind the scenes. Next, I'm going to say this. I'm not doing this for any comparison's sake, so don't look at it that way. This is to give you a feel for, these are output measures as it relates to commercialization in universities. So invention disclosures, it just kind of gives you a feel for the numbers that are happening on a state level, and usually, large universities are always going to have the bigger numbers here. So that's why I want to emphasize there are no comparisons, but it gives you a feel for invention disclosures, U.S. patents that are issued. So those are ones, they file a patent and then some years later they get issued. Licenses that the universities are giving to big companies or licensing to big or small companies, and options, the number of startups, and license income. So these are the doctoral granting institutions, and then the other institutions that are not. So if we start looking at trends then, so if we take all your UNC system information on disclosures, patents, what we're seeing, so invention disclosures are up 8% from 2012 over the last 4 years. Patents look pretty, flat. You can see that. The licensing options are up 50%. So that's good. That's showing that, your universities are increasing the level of options that they are administering. Startups are up 80%. Now, those are really small numbers, but eventually that all should lead to our licensing income increasing. It's up 21% right now. So if the startups are up 80%, but licensing income's only up 20%, what does that tell you? What's that? Startup companies have a harder time. It takes them a long time. I said 10 years, like for us to get, before we gave money back to a university. It takes them longer, but it's not bad to see the increase in startups, because over time, that'll happen. So the opportunity is, how do we increase their level of success? And that's where, we talk about industry. The other thing that's happening here, large companies do a lot, they have, larger licensing. You get large part of licensing income from larger companies and not startups. So the next couple of graphs. So have you heard of AUTM? Sometimes people talk about AUTM. That's the Association of University Technology Managers. And they do an annual survey every year. So the next couple of graphs, and this is for the whole state. So you can see Duke is in here because they're part of the state. But in 2014, these numbers look pretty good for us. The AUTM, so these are universities outside of North Carolina. On average, each year they're executing about 30 licenses a year. Our average is 41. And you can see in the system here, we're in pretty good shape. If you look at licenses executed per 10 million of research expenditures, again, I don't know if everybody can see that, we're in good shape. I mean, you can see a lot of UNC system institutions here. All good. Total licenses, the startups, we fall off a little bit here. So, but NC State's ahead of the AUTM average, but still, that's not bad. Here's where our opportunity is, and we've heard this over and over again, that, we're one of the top states as it relates to funded research, but we're towards the bottom as it relates to licensing. So income that's coming in based on that funded research. So if you look here, the universities on average outside of North Carolina annually are bringing in about $435 million, and we're bringing in $135 million. So that gap is closing, but there are things that maybe strategically to work on there. I know within your universities, if you talk to folks there, especially in the tech transfer offices, they can probably say, well, this is what we feel is the reason for that. So anyway, just wanted to, hopefully that was helpful just to kind of get the lay of the land as to, what people are looking at from a commercialization perspective in universities. So lastly, let's see. So the University Innovation Council I mentioned. So I've served on governor-initiated innovation councils with both Governor Perdue and then now with Governor McCrory. And Governor McCrory had a program called Innovation to Jobs, and several of you may be aware of that a couple of years ago. And an action item that came out of that was the formation of a University Innovation Council. And this is probably one of the best, I guess it was a university-wide initiative that I have across the state that I've been a part of. John Harden in the back was another steering committee member, and really the wind beneath our wings, he and Scott Duran back here from the Department of Commerce. And I'm going to go over just names of folks that are part of the university system. So Jeff Brennan with Wake Forest, Chris Brown was another steering committee member, Joe Kazier is back here. He also is at App State and is a director of Center for Analytics Research and Education. I want to point out, Joe, raise your hand, he mapped all the tech transfer processes across all of the universities. And that's a major first step in trying to streamline. So, and he's also our tech transfer fellow, right? Judith Cohn's in the back, UNC Chapel Hill, Vice Chancellor, Commercialization, Economic Development. Craig Galbraith with UNCW, Andy Hoffler with NC Central. Erin Hopper she helped pull all this together too, research director, and probably a steering committee member too. You're doing a lot behind the scenes. Darius Isla with Fayetteville State, Staten Knoll with UNC Greensboro, Kelly Sexton at NC State, Wayne Safransky, whose name was mentioned earlier, with NCA&T, Marty Van Scott with ECU, Paul Wettenhall, UNC Charlotte, James Woods from University of North Carolina at Pembroke, Ed Wright with Western Carolina. So we had all of those folks. We worked hard. How many weeks? Can't remember. Lots of meetings, and these are the recommendations that we came up with. Now, I'll say these have not been issued to anyone yet, and we will be presenting them, so they haven't gone to the governor's office yet. So hopefully you won't take them and do anything else with them, but we're giving you a little preview right now. So I'm not going to go over these in close detail, but the first reward, and maybe as you work on your strategies, if anything aligns with what you're doing, then that will be really synchronous. So reward and encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. You know, what's behind this is rewarding activities in innovation, translation, and entrepreneurship. We've talked about things in here, and we will be presenting, such as altering leave policies to pause tenure clocks to allow time for researchers to initiate innovation. So some of these are big, and some of you may say, no way, but these are some of the things we talked about. Include innovation and entrepreneurship in post-tenure review. Those states that are ahead of us, these are things that they're doing. So we have to pay attention. The next one is develop the North Carolina Technology Advancement Pathways. This is really important. I think something that came out that is really great. One, this is utilizing the infrastructure at NC State and UNC Chapel Hill, starting there primarily, and having them support other UNC universities. Not every UNC university has a tech transfer office. So if we can do that on a fee-based service, and that's another way to close the gap. Whoops. You can tell I'm almost done. NC TAC, or NC Technology Advancement Capitalization Program, we talked about early stage funding and there being a gap. This really has the state, most of these, believe it or not, we're not asking for a lot of state funding. This one we are, but in an endowment concept. So, and it would be on an institutional level, so each university could participate as they wish. In a type of matching program, but we're excited about that. So it will provide proof of concept funding outside of SBIR. The Innovation Fellowship, this basically is a one-year fellowship that provides a stipend of $25,000 for bachelor's, $50,000 for graduate level. So they can you can see here. And it enables them to transition to a full-time role in a startup. Telling the innovation story, we don't feel like we do enough of that in terms of, you know, what's happening in our universities today. We have great stats that people don't know about, so we need to do a better job of that. So I talked a lot and probably rather quickly, but appreciate your attention, and hopefully there are some things that I said that you can use from a strategy perspective. If I said anything wrong in the room, the folks in the back can correct me likely. So thanks again, appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. We're running just a little bit behind schedule, but we want to spend a few minutes with our roundtable, and then I'll cut my closing remarks from 45 minutes down to about 15, and we can maybe get something for lunch. So I'm going to turn this over to Junius.
Okay, well, this group doesn't need any moderation, at least regarding questions, because they're full of them. So I'm going to ask you a very high-level question, each of you. We've talked about numerous outcomes, right? Like talent development, licensing dollars, et cetera. So I would ask each of you to comment on what would be your greatest wish, pick an outcome, what would be your greatest wish to achieve that outcome that the state should do, the universities should do, and businesses should do? So an easy question. Fran, you want to take that first?
Well, I guess the first thing that came to my mind is that we all three work together and drive to the same outcome. You know, I think whether it was the Talent Innovation Place, which I really liked, or I had kind of talent, I put down recruiting, but recruiting, innovation, and tying in how do we drive business out of that. And so we look at, you know, I moved to North Carolina in 1988. I also have, when I came back to IBM, the only thing I negotiated was I was not moving to New York, right? That I was going to stay here. What can we do to really have North Carolina be successful in the future? And I think it'll take all three to come together to do that.
So I would say that it's not an outcome. But it's so important. I think we now know that the kind of environments we have to create is so important to the outcomes. And so what I'm talking about is this ecosystem idea that we know that these outcomes don't happen by any one company or university or community organization alone. They happen in collaboration. So I'd say that, you know, not an outcome, but maybe an output of our policy and our work on economic engagement could be more places like Centennial Campus or other examples. I'm sure there are plenty across the state where business and industry and universities are together under one roof, and where community organizations are there with them. That's even all the better, because I think that's where we're going to start to see the ability to achieve a lot of the other kinds of outcomes that we want to see. And we're also going to be able to start sharing the load in terms of telling the story and measuring things, which is really hard to do when we all sit in our own offices and don't have a chance to communicate across a university system or communicate with our corporate partners. So I'd say an outcome I think that would be really worth shooting for is improving the network development in the state and doing that through collaborative spaces.
So this is a little of, if I'm a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I care about licensing, but that doesn't mean that everybody else cares about that. I mean, part of outcomes need, so I'm saying this from a licensing and income perspective to universities. This collaboration of business, I said we learned that the hard way in terms of not getting industry around the table in the beginning, because all of the universities, whether they're the smallest university in the state or the largest, have just tremendous potential from intellectual property standpoint and inventors that are there. They can solve problems that are not being solved in business today. And you see all the shedding of R&D, Glaxo laying off folks. In the ag side, we've got Syngenta merging and Monsanto moving to St. Louis, that's creating a big gap in R&D that these universities have. I just feel like there's just huge opportunity there. So it's more just collaborating. Hard to do, though. Yeah.
Other questions? Given our time and the chairman's.
Any
Yeah,
questions from anyone?
there's somebody
Well,
back there.
oh, sorry. Oh, Zito.
Yeah, I think you had a figure there for 90 patents issued by the old system in a year. Is that in a year?
Yes, there was a figure for 90 patents issued throughout the system in a year.
So, you know, I used to work very closely when I was at Western University with CMU, and they used to have like 70 just by themselves. So comparatively, how do we compare? How do we stack up as a state? These other states in the generation of issued patents, because issued patents are critical across the board in high tech and in life sciences to eventually generate innovation and be able to license. If you don't have the issued patents, particular businesses are going to stay away, so I'm not interested. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
So the question is, on the patent slide that that we had, John, you may have an answer to this. How do we compare as a state compared to other universities outside of the state in terms of patents issued? We have 90. And keep in mind, you know, there are patents issued in the number, and there are patents also just, or inventions disclosed. Sometimes those get, you know, but I don't know exactly. We definitely have the information, but I didn't have it as a slide.
Could I just add something? So one thing I would caution against is getting too hung up on patent numbers. A number of patents doesn't tell us how many of them are high quality patents. It doesn't tell us how many of them have promised to be commercialized. If we focus more on the environment that we need to create in order for us to have success with innovation and commercialization, we're going to do much better by ourselves. Now, I get that wanting to see these numbers is important. It helps us kind of set goals and move forward towards targets. But we have to be really careful when we start talking about the metrics that we're going to use to measure the success of our innovation enterprises. Patents is one. I think we also get stuck in licensing revenue, and we start to believe that licensing revenue is the way to measure the success of tech transfer offices. And I can tell you that it's not. 15% of tech transfer offices nationally even break even on their tech transfer operations. That's not why we do tech transfer. We don't do it to generate revenue for the institution. We do it for the public good. So I think as we look at numbers like this, let's also make sure that we're thinking about creative ways to measure the network development, the collaboration, and creating the environment that we need to have success with whatever number of patents we come out with.
Anyone else? I'm going to have a closing comment if there are no other questions.
I've got one. I just something I noticed from Karen's slides. It looks like Duke University's doing a lot, and maybe that's a model we might want to look at. I saw $500 million a year from, I think they have 8,400 graduate students. That was impressive. That looks like a model we might want to look at. It was about $100 million more than what we're bringing in as far as licensing fees go. Do we know what they're doing right?
Some of it's a little bit of culture from a tech transfer office. Their startup numbers are really low, right? Which that, from a whole motivation standpoint in a university, is tough, because inventors, faculty may want to help get companies started. Small businesses want to spawn off from universities. They started focusing on just big companies from a licensing perspective. Judith, you may have better information. Tech transfer leadership has changed, so I don't know if that'll continue to be the case, but the amount of research that's sponsored in the UNC system is about equal the amount that the private schools have for the state. So it's just sizable.
Yeah, I think in closing, innovation, whether it's innovation in the classroom and pedagogy, carries risk. Okay, and risk is often offset by the amount of resources an institution or an organization has. And so I think the call for thinking beyond current collaborations between the state institutions and the private sector is going to be really, really critical. Like, you can't have an innovative course and the students don't learn anything and they fail, right? There's just no slack to pick up that failure. And I think that does cut across a number of things. And, you know, there also are some lessons, I think, from Duke and other places about they are so well-resourced, and when you think about their potential for startup packages, and I won't ask Chancellor Folt right now to comment on that, or Chancellor Woodson, there are some serious challenges, particularly in the non-medical areas, in terms of bringing people in and on board. So I want to thank our panelists for terrific presentations, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer a few questions up here. I'll turn it over to Chairman Bissett.
Thank you very much, Junius. First of all, let's give all of our guest presenters a really big hand. Thank all of you for joining us today. I know I learned of, you know, this job we have as Board of Governors members, it doesn't pay very well in some ways, but you get to be exposed to people like you, and so it's a continuous learning experience. And I've learned a lot of things this morning. I didn't think I could learn anything from Tennessee, but I think I did. And then I learned some things like serious gaming. I thought that was a slot machine. And T-shaped skills. I was glad to learn that too. So we learned a great deal from all of you, and I really appreciate it. I know all of our board members appreciate it, and it's going to help us a great deal this afternoon when we really begin to get into our strategic planning process. As you know, our first committee meetings start at 12:45. We're going to be having lunch in the main dining room, and we would like for the Ed Planning Committee members to go through the line first, not because they're hungrier than the rest of us, but because they can get started. But thanks again. That's all I have. Margaret, do you have? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Excellent. How are you doing? It's so good to see you.
It's hard though because it's squishy. But the squishier things, people get very nervous.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.